All right, the April 12th, 2018 meeting of the Rent Control Board is called back to order from closed session. If we could please have a report of closed session. Oh, the pledge. Why do I always forget that pledge? Please join us for the salute to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, now may we have a report of closed session.
Yes, the board met in closed session at 6:25. They discussed the one item on the agenda, which was manager's compensation. The board voted to grant cost of living adjustments of 2.3% for 2018 and equivalent to the annual change in the Los Angeles area CPI for 2018 for the 2019 adjustment, but not to exceed 2.5%. And the closed session ended at 6:55.
All right, thank you. And now we will take just a moment to look over the minutes from the March 22nd meeting. And I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll entertain your request. I move we accept the minutes of March 22nd.
I'll second.
All right, there's a first and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, the minutes are read into the record. And any special agenda items or announcements from staff?
Yes, I have just a couple this evening. Welcome to the public. Thank you for joining us tonight. I wanted to mention that on April 3rd, we held a very well-attended rent control seminar on owning rental property. We had more than 50 people attend. They said that they felt they learned about the topics that they were interested in. It was very successful. So I want to thank Mr. Costello and his staff for presenting the seminar. You've heard me for many months or several months talk about the fair housing issue, rental housing forum that's coming up, and that's less than 2 weeks away now. That will be on April 24th. It's being sponsored by the Consumer Protection Division of the City Attorney's Office, the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles, Action Apartment Association, Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights, and the Rent Control Board. These are well-attended seminars. Anybody who's interested should sign up either through a link on our website or the City Attorney's website. There is a limited number of seats. It will be at the Martin Luther King Auditorium at the main library on the morning of April 24th. So if you're interested, please sign up. The City Council has adopted a new policy with respect to PowerPoint presentations from the public. So in the future, if anybody wants to have a PowerPoint presentation the evening of a board meeting, they need to submit that to Lonnie Gwynn, our board secretary, earlier. Either email it during the day or submit your flash drive by noon that day, because it's a security issue and they want to make sure that no viruses are introduced into the city network. So this is a policy that they're going to apply to all boards and commissions. So please be conscious of that if you're interested in a PowerPoint presentation at a future meeting. And finally, anybody who's interested in receiving periodic emails from the Rent Control Office with board agendas and announcements can sign up on our webpage through the quick links section on our webpage. That's what I have this evening.
Thank you, Tracy. And for those of you walking in, we do have some room up front and in the center. And if those of you on the edges could be kind if you intend to stay for the evening and maybe move in towards the center and free up some seats for our other attendees. Thank you. All right. So, Lonnie, are these the only two items set for public?
Correct.
All right. We have two people wishing to speak. This is our public comment section. This is a time for the public to speak on the general jurisdictional items of the board or things under the board's purview. We just have two tonight. First one is James Massey, and the next one will be Brian Harmon. And because you're speaking on other items, you've requested 2 minutes.
Is this the correct spot?
It is. Go ahead and bend that down toward yourself, and Lonnie will turn it on for you.
Yep, just a second here. I had to go first. I just want to say, so my wife and I are both renters, like many of you. We rent a studio apartment, and we're expecting our first daughter in June, which we're very excited about. This last November, we were able to put all of our savings into a down payment on a property on 28th Street. It's a 4-unit property, it's fully vacant, and has been left abandoned since about the 80s. So my wife and I put our own blood, sweat, and tears into this property to try to make it habitable, and bring 4 more units into properties so that people can rent them, we can rent them. Our friends live in the neighborhood, and we're happy to be a part of Santa Monica, hopefully. We don't have any other property, and I want to dispel the myth that any recent owners or purchasers are corporations or billionaires, because we're not. This is everything we own. If you guys roll back any ability for us to impact our income, you have to understand that we are paying a mortgage and taxes and everything based on 2018 and the amount of money that we paid for this property. If you roll back any incomes or our ability to pay for our large mortgage, you may impact us in our ability to pay the bank. And if we can't pay the bank ultimately, as you know, will take the property. So I just want everybody here to really think very closely and not think that all recent purchasers or owners are billionaires or corporations. They're people that, like me and my wife, who've worked in Santa Monica since 2003 and have dreamed of owning a property in Santa Monica. And only now in November was that a possibility. So I love the city, and I thank you guys for allowing me to speak to all of you and address you. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, and so folks, for every public meeting, it's the same set of rules apply. So we understand, landlords are going to cheer for landlords, tenants are going to cheer for tenants. Understood. So we need you to, I'm still going to ask you to refrain from long displays of applause. Do this, do something else. Thank you so much for indulging us on that in the interest of time. Brian Harmon, you are next with 2 minutes.
Hello. I agree with everything that he has said. I purchased a property here in 2004, and I was one of the first ones to revamp and redo the property and make it nice for the tenants. And I never have problems with my tenants, knock on wood. Because of your legislation and everything, I am planning on selling because it's too uncertain for me, and it is my retirement. And I find in different parts of the country, I can have more certainty with my investments. So I am selling. I'm not going to stay here. And, because I cannot, over the years, you guys have had different CPIs for fire, water, sewer raises during the economic downturn. And then you cut the pass-throughs for rent control. So what it was, a year or two ago, the essential rent control maximum increase was like $1.69 because you took half of the pass-through away and you allowed $1.69. We can't keep up with insurances, with earthquake insurance, warranties for the building. It takes me half a year to get through that. And I'm meticulous. I take care of my property. Whenever there's anything wrong, it's done immediately. And what you guys are doing, and now with not allowing us to pass through the taxes to the tenants, I think this is just ridiculous. And I think it's also ridiculous when you guys were going to hold us accountable for water usage. I took all the lawn out, put drip lines and gravel in. Anything beyond that would have been tenant usage. I put water restrictors on, and I reduced that. But you guys threatened to charge us for the water. That's not fair. So I'm just like him. I've saved and put my money into these properties, or to this property, and it's going on the market very soon. So I'm cashing out. I'm not going to be here, because it's too uncertain.
I'd like to ask you a follow-up, a clarifying question. How many units are on your property?
4.
Okay, and what are your current pass-throughs to each unit per month?
Current pass-throughs?
Right.
Well,
The surcharge is on top of the MAR. When you
surcharge-
filled out the worksheet.
Yeah, so it's about $40-50 or something like that.
Okay. Thank you.
But you're...
That was my
okay.
question. Thank
All
you
right.
so much. Thanks for coming. All right. All right, folks, moving right along. Thank you for all your public comment. Public comment is now closed. We'll go on to item 10, jurisdictional item. We have 2 appeals tonight. The first case, 10A, is case D-4877, 2601 23rd Street, Unit 2603. Can we have a staff report, please?
Good evening, Commissioners. Ms. Sharon Hagan filed a rent decrease petition for her apartment alleging various maintenance conditions and reductions in housing services, and the hearing officer granted her a $314 rent decrease. Ms. Hagan has appealed the denial of the rent decrease for several conditions that she had alleged but which were not granted a rent decrease. The board may grant a rent decrease if the record shows an alleged condition to have been a housing service in need of repair, a violation of a housing code, or a reduction in an amenity that the tenant received at the inception of the tenancy when the parties agreed to the initial base rent. As the petitioner, Ms. Hagan bears the burden of proving that a condition satisfies these criteria by a preponderance of the evidence. As the appellate body, the board may reverse a hearing officer's finding only if the record shows the finding to have been unreasonable and clearly erroneous. The record here reasonably supports the hearing officer's finding as to the conditions that are the subject of Ms. Hagan's appeal. First, the screen door. Ms. Hagan received a rent decrease for an improperly mounted sliding glass door, but she also wants a decrease for the screen door. The record showed, however, that the door was only provided by the landlord after she had moved in, so it's not a housing service of her tenancy. In her appeal, Ms. Hagan states that she had been promised a screen door, presumably meaning that when she had moved in, and the landlord did not install it until later. But she didn't testify to this during the hearing, nor did she submit any evidence to substantiate this claim. Furthermore, the lease states that it constitutes the entire agreement between the parties. The record before the board fails to show that Screen Door was a housing service of her tenancy. As for windows, Ms. Hagan received a rent decrease because her windows lacked weatherproofing, but she would like an additional decrease because she says they rattle. The hearing investigator visited the property, tested the windows, and did not observe them to rattle, even when the air conditioner was on or traffic went by. Ms. Hagan states in appeal that the investigator had noticed the windows rattling in an earlier visit 2.5 years prior. But the hearing officer reasonably relied on the investigator's more recent report for this case, which did not show that to be a problem. Ms. Hagan cites the hearsay observations of her brother, who she says is a construction supervisor, as to that rattling problem, but he did not attend the hearing. The hearing officer's finding is reasonably supported by the record before the board. On HVAC, Ms. Hagan states that her HVAC does not work properly and had been the subject of a code enforcement complaint. But that complaint was closed a year ago, after the code officer confirmed that the landlord had repaired the problem. The hearing investigator also reported the system to be operative with good airflow in all vents, though weaker in the office and bathroom. Because there was no evidence that the HVAC unit was in violation of a housing code and insufficient evidence that it needed repair, the hearing officer reasonably denied a rent decrease for this item as well. Water pressure in the shower. Ms. Hagan alleged inadequate water pressure. The hearings investigator visited, observed the water pressure and the volume of water to be normal. She failed to provide any other evidence to substantiate her allegation by a preponderance of the evidence. Exterior lights. Ms. Hagan wanted a decrease because there were no exterior lights on a path from her front door to the sidewalk. But there was no such lights when she moved in, and there is no evidence of this being a housing code violation, so there's no basis for a rent decrease. Space for refrigerator. Ms. Hagan wants a bigger fridge that does not fit in the footprint of her current fridge. Her desire for a larger refrigerator and the absence of space to accommodate it is neither a code violation nor a reduction of an amenity. And finally, landscaping. The hearing officer granted Ms. Hagan a reduction for landscaping because the owner had failed to maintain it. She, however, wants an additional decrease for 4 large trees that she accuses the landlord of having removed or having allowed to be removed. She did not provide any evidence of the number and quality of the trees when she moved in, so there's no basis for that to be founded as an amenity, and therefore there's no basis for an additional decrease for a reduction of an amenity. Staff recommends that the board affirm the hearing officer's decision.
Thank you. We do have one request to speak on this item. 10A1, Michelle Lee. Is there a Michelle Lee present?
Oh, that we just agree with the hearing officer and the investigator.
I'm sorry, who are you to this?
Oh, I'm Michelle Lee, and this is the landlord, Shinja Kim, so I'm translating for her.
Okay.
And just that we agree with the hearing officer, Hollingsworth, and also Savino, the investigator.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay. All right, we'll have some. As the appellant, you have the right to do so. You didn't fill out one of these slips of paper, which is why we didn't know you wished to speak. So, yeah, so you can approach the microphone. And how many minutes? Up to 5.
I don't know if I'll be able to do it in that time. I have a bunch of information here for you guys. In terms of the refrigerator, thank you for laughing, everybody. I brought medical, I have a really bad back and I'm 72 years old and I'm crouching down on my haunches to open the refrigerator. I never asked them to pay for me to widen the aperture. I said I would pay for it. I just asked for the ability to do that. So I already told the officer that I wasn't sure that was the appropriate venue for that. So I will leave it up to you, but if you want to see my medical records, here they are. As to the HVAC system, I brought my most recent gas bills. If anybody, multiple copies, anybody want to see them?
We're not able to take new evidence at this time. This is an appeal.
Okay, but the hearing officer said that they couldn't give me a decrease because, well, there are many things about the HVAC. The HVAC system was installed without a permit. I researched the machine. It was bought after my landlord bought the building. It was installed on the roof where previously it was installed inside the house, which should have triggered a cascade of state energy regulation requirements, including the ductwork, checking the ductwork, not the pressurization of the house, but the hangings, the ducts opening or closing. In fact, last Christmas it was found that the duct to my living room had never been opened. There are also, I introduced these specs into the hearings, which went on for 2 years, by the way, and that showed that the filter in the thing is up on the roof where I cannot access it. And I introduced into the hearing the maintenance requirements from the manufacturer. And they require that the filter really should be changed once a month, but I'm not expecting them to do that. But it should be at least changed once or twice a year. It's been changed 4 or 5 times since I moved in, and I'll be there 10 years in June. I brought, so if anybody wants to see that, and they were introduced into the hearing, I don't know. The hearing officer, Hollingsworth, stated that it was all too complicated for her in terms of the HVAC. She just couldn't understand. But the city violated state law by retroactively giving these people a permit in 2010 for something that was installed in 2005 and not abiding by the requirements of the state. And I brought, in case anybody wants to see, my most recent medical records, which show that I've had pneumonia for the last 2 years. The HVAC failed a year ago last Christmas. I was without heat for 5 days. I've had pneumonia ever since. I have a specialized appointment next week in the Valley because I can't get well. And my immune system is now trashed. So I don't understand why, at least, they should not be required to do maintenance on this thing as required by the manufacturer, since I can't do it. It's up on the roof. What am I supposed, I don't know what to do. You know, and anything outside the envelope of the house is not my responsibility. So frankly, I'm appalled at the city's, I've escalated this up to to David Martin, and I've escalated David Aiello, communicated with me recently saying, well, you have heat. I don't have heat in the back of the house. The front of the front has to pull the heat in there. Their own HVAC repairman came to my house and tested the strongest vent with his little handheld thing. Why the city doesn't have one of these things, I don't know. But I'm sorry, is there a problem?
I want to see the pictures.
Okay. And I brought more that were actually introduced. Yeah. And I don't understand. I mean, at least they should change the filter, should they not? I can't.
And the audience will remain completely silent. Thank you.
It's supposed to be at least changed 4 times a year. I would be happy with 2.
Ms. Hagan, thank you very much for your
And then
statement.
there's stuff about the
Ms. Hagan, your
trees.
time is up. Thank you so much. Thank you. We're going to discuss your case now.
All right, well, please look at the trees, because what I don't understand
Ms.
is-
Hagan, your time is up.
I understand, but there were pictures that were submitted.
Ms. Hagan, we're going to continue with our discussion at this time. We've reviewed your letters and all of your input. We're going to review your case at this time. Ms. Hagan, you won't be able to stay to hear the discussion unless you respect the rules. So please let us proceed with the discussion. And thank you very much. All right. Commissioner Phyllis.
I appreciate that both the landlord and the appellant came out for public comment tonight. I also appreciate everyone else in the audience here participating in this public process. I believe the hearing officer's recommendation, staff's recommendation to deny the appeal and affirm the hearing officer's decision is clear. There's a reasonable basis on which to uphold it. That's our standard of review. I therefore move that we deny the appeal and affirm the hearing officer's decision.
Let's pause. Commissioner Trosis, you had your name in the queue, but did you remove it? There's no one else in the queue to speak, so do you need more time? Commissioner Duran or Commissioner Flora, do you have anything to add? Commissioner Duran.
I do. I have a question. I see on page 14 of the report that there was testimony by Ms. Lee that the HVAC system was repaired in January of 2017, and that the Santa Monica Code of Compliance Department issued the permit for the HVAC system, and the relocation order was closed. Can you tell me, was there any testimony to refute that's in the evidence since that repair took place in January 27th to indicate that the HVAC?
No, the record in the evidence in the record shows that there's no outstanding code violations for the HVAC unit from the code enforcement unit of the city.
Okay, all right. That was my only question. If the opportunity is still present, I'm willing to second Commissioner Phyllis's motion.
Commissioner Flora or Commissioner Trosis, do you have anything further on the discussion? If not, there's a motion with a second on the floor.
Yeah, I just
Commissioner
want to
Flora.
add that we do take these jurisdictional items very seriously, and there are times, and I think this is one of those cases, where the decision we have to make isn't one where we can always guarantee the tenant their ideal level of comfort. I'm very sorry you're having these health issues, Ms. Hagan. I really am. But as we have to take into account the fact that you have received increases, and I've worked with code compliance pretty recently on a case of a tenant that was really in a bad mold situation, and they don't kid around. They're not happily green lining bad HVAC machines. So we can only go with the evidence that's presented to us. It's unfortunate that we cannot always guarantee every tenant's complete comfort, and because I do hope you get some of the things you need to take care of these health issues. But I will have to agree with the motion based on the evidence and based on what is required to overcome that evidence to grant any further decrease.
So
Thank you, Commissioner Flora.
can we call the question or?
Well, Commissioner Trost has indicated that she wants to speak.
Okay.
Yeah, I also would have to agree with Commissioner Flora. I think that, the decision by the hearing officer was not a clearly erroneous one. We can reasonably support the hearing officer's findings. I just wanted to take another look at the pictures. And I do see here that Ms. Hagan was granted a $314 decrease in her MAR. And I do understand that you are having these health issues. I am very sorry, but again, due to the standard of review here, and given the evidence that I've seen, I have to go ahead and agree with the motion, and I'm ready to vote.
All right, we'll call the vote.
Commissioner Trosis,
Yes.
Commissioner Flora,
Yes.
Commissioner Phyllis,
Yes.
Commissioner Duran,
Yes.
and Commissioner Foster.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Our next jurisdictional item is case N-0258, 2721 2nd Street, Unit 215. This is an appeal by G. Marway, the tenant. May we please have a staff report?
Commissioners, Regulation 3304 allows landlords to petition the board to find that a tenant no longer lives in a unit as their, quote, usual residence of return, which would make the tenant a tenant not in occupancy, and which requires the unit's maximum allowable rent to be reset according to a formula that's based on recent market rents of comparable units. Ms. Langlois brought the condo at issue last summer. The Marways have rented that unit since 1979. They also own a home in La Quinta, California, where Mrs. Marway resides. Because Ms. Langlois believes neither Mr. nor Mrs. Marway live in the Santa Monica condo as their principal residence, she petitioned the board to find them as tenants not in occupancy. Ms. Langlois provided prima facie evidence that Mr. Marway did not reside in the unit. The inspector she had hired when buying the unit in July of last year confirmed that it did not have gas, which would make the oven, range, and heater inoperable. Mr. Marway also conceded that the unit had lacked gas for a year. The inspector's photos showed the unit to be virtually unlivable with extreme clutter throughout. Ms. Langlois, who had been able to enter the unit at the time of purchase, testified that the unit appeared as if it was being used only for storage. Her son, who also entered the unit at that time, testified that the unit was dark, it smelled terrible, and had clutter as high as his neck. Ms. Langlois' mother, who also visited the property at that time, testified that she had met a few neighbors and they had told her that the tenant only used the unit for storage. 1 week prior to the hearing, Ms. Langlois and her son were in town, and they testified that they checked for Mr. Marway's car every day in his assigned space but never saw it. A friend, Michael Cook, testified that he looked in the unit's window and saw that it was dark with no signs of movement or occupancy. That evidence established a prima facie case that the Marways did not reside in the unit as their principal residence. Mr. Marway therefore bore the burden of refuting that evidence. But prior to the hearing, he refused to allow the hearings investigator, who had been sent by the hearing officer, to enter the unit to verify his occupancy. At the hearing, Mr. Marway acted in a disruptive manner and repeatedly interrupted the testimony of other witnesses with outbursts. Despite being admonished, he refused to sit down, stood in an agitated manner, and spoke out of turn. Finally, after repeated warning, the hearing officer ordered Mr. Marway to leave until it was his turn to testify. When he returned, he provided evidence that was both irrelevant or it was dated, and also refused to provide current evidence relevant to the question of his current occupancy. He refused to answer questions about his La Quinta home, the cars registered there, and the address that he used on his tax return. Given this record, the hearing officer found the Marways to no longer be tenants in occupancy and reset the rents according to regulations formula. The board may reverse this decision only if it finds it to be clearly erroneous and unreasonable given the record. In his appeal, Mr. Marway suggests that he was not provided due process at the hearing. He requests a new hearing because he says he had a seizure at that hearing, of which there is no evidence. He says that he suffered from dizziness, low blood sugar, a terrible flu, and an ulcer, yet he never mentioned these conditions during the hearing, nor did he request a continuance because he felt unwell. He also appears to argue that his due process rights were violated because he did not get to cross-examine Ms. Langlois and her witnesses. The opportunity to be heard is a fundamental requirement of due process. However, in an administrative hearing such as this one, the full rights of confrontation and cross-examination are not necessarily required. What must be afforded is a reasonable opportunity to be heard. The hearing officer excluded Mr. Marway during the testimony of the other witnesses after his behavior prevented the hearing from proceeding, and only after multiple warnings. The hearing officer had the right to control the course of the hearing, and she did so in a reasonable manner. Mr. Marway had ample opportunity to be heard by the hearing officer. He even had the opportunity to cross-examine witnesses. That he was ultimately deprived of the ability to do so because of his own disruptive behavior is not a violation of due process. Mr. Marway also requests a new hearing because he wants to submit new evidence. The time for Mr. Marway to have submitted evidence on this case was at the hearing that he was afforded. The purpose of an appeal is not to get a do-over. Staff recommends that the board affirm the hearing officer's decision.
Thank you for that report. Before we proceed, staff has alerted me to a rule in City Hall chambers. So everyone is required to take a seat. There is no standing room only policy because of the fire marshal's code. So we're going to have to, it's like Southwest Airlines. Get to know your neighbor, and because that middle seat's going to be taken. Please try to find a seat in the room.
Isn't there also overflow downstairs where they can watch the television?
In the hallway right behind us by the copy machines and the restrooms, you can hear the entire broadcast. And if you want to come in during your item, if you're speaking, you could come back when we're nearing the item that you wish to speak on. There are 2 seats in the front row still. Well, and just like Southwest Airlines, you did that in an orderly fashion, and we thank you very much. All right.
Thank you.
That's all right. Safety first. So we do have 2 requests to speak on this item. First will be the appellant, Mr. Marway. And you have 5 minutes, sir. Not yet. It is now.
Okay. I want to show the first no violation declaration by Attorney Lorman present. There is absolutely no violation, any health, any safety, no violation at the building, and no safety violation. I checked myself.
What is this?
Mr. Marway, you have to remain at the. You have to remain at the microphone.
You can't approach the dais.
Yeah.
So, sir, this is the well. Hand
that to the clerk, and please come back to the microphone to complete your allotted time, sir. Thank you.
No violation in the apartment. The other problem is the ownership. It is the assessor's property tax bill. It's not addressed to Mrs. Langlois. Mrs. Langlois reverted the title back to RH property without change of ownership after 9 months. So we have to decide who is the owner, who is the not. She is collecting the rent, but the title reverted to RH property. There is other documentation.
Just hold on to those until you're done.
Because I got sick at the hearing, the first hour I missed, all the testimonies, all the goodies, all the witnesses. So I need time to represent my documentation. It won't be easy now. Here is the grand deed. What is forged? Very sorry to say. It used to be the notarized document. Somebody or the claim to be owner, Langlois is she is from Toronto, Canada, never give us a good working phone number, any address. Her address is fake. She has no POS address, what is legal. POS means proof of service, the legal business. Okay. Look at the upper left.
We're not able to entertain new evidence during
It's
your
not a
during
new
your appeal.
evidence. I couldn't show to the hearing officer because
If it was
that was denied.
that is the definition of new
is a
evidence.
very
If it was not
important-
introduced during the hearing, we can't talk about it here. So, but please proceed with comments that you have, but not
Okay.
pertaining to the document.
What you wanna hear then? Why I'm here? That same thing happened with the hearing. All my rights denied. Due process, big words, whatever. It's all evidence here, very valuable. I am living in Santa Monica 38 years, and they are saying I'm not living in the unit. I work for the Blue Bus as a civil servant. My wife, resident, was 22 years. She escaped all the harassment, all the problems. Now, the gas company closed the gas, there's no heating, no cooking, so we can get a decent decrease, -$100 or something. The next problem is TV signal was cut inside the walls. It's all part of the long time, 30 years harassment, oscillating harassment we call.
Thank you for coming up to speak. That's the end of your time. Thank you so much. If you could take a seat.
It wasn't enough.
I'm sorry, sir. That is the allotted time for you to speak on your appeal. And next, we're going to hear from Mr. Bruce Lorman.
One more.
Mr. Marway, your time has expired. If you could
Just
go ahead and
one
please take a
sentence.
seat.
One sentence, please. Because it's our future. Yeah, retired senior citizens.
Commissioner Terosis wants to ask you a question.
Do you own a car?
We got 2 cars.
Is there a
Why
reason?
why is that?
Is there a reason why your car was not parked at your house if you claim to live there?
The car is parked in the assigned parking lot when we arrived home.
How did you live in your unit for a year without any gas?
You can live without gas. You can cook. You can try microwave. You can try electric, whatever. It's not a big comfort.
Thank you, sir. That'll be the conclusion of the comments for the moment. Mr. Lorman.
I am asking all my documents back.
Of course. Please see the clerk.
You are not reading it anyway.
Mr. Lorman, please.
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. My name is Bruce Lorman. I'm an attorney. My office is across the street on 4th Street at 1717 4th Street. I represent the landlord in this case, Lisa Langlois. Unfortunately, she could not be here tonight because she's caring for her elderly mother and her sick son. But I did attend the hearing with her that was discussed somewhat in the staff report. And it actually you saw a little flavor of what happened at that hearing, although the first 34 minutes of our hearing with the hearing officer, we were not permitted to present at all because of interruptions from Mr. Marway, and that's why the hearing officer asked him to leave while we presented our case. But Mr. Marway came back in and he had the full opportunity to present his case, to present all the evidence he had, and instead what he did was similar to what you just saw here, which was attack me for some declaration or claim that the owner didn't own the property or things. It's his burden to prove that he lives there. He didn't submit any evidence then, he didn't submit any evidence now, and the information in the summary of the staff report is exactly correct as to what the hearing officer found. So unless there's any questions, I would rest with that.
I don't have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we'll begin our discussion. We'll go ahead and start with Commissioner Phyllis.
It's clear that there's a reasonable basis on which to affirm the hearing officer's decision. Thus, we, I think, have to affirm. I'm prepared to make a motion, and will do so unless my other commissioners wish to speak on it. Commissioner Duran?
Commissioner Duran, go ahead.
The only question that as I read through the report, and that I want to be sure of is towards the end, there was question about whether or not there was a due process issue related to behavior that apparently he brought on himself, but what effect that might have had in hearing the presentation of the landlord and the attorney who was there presenting their case. Counsel, do you have any insight on that?
As Mr. Mordesai mentioned in the staff report, unlike a criminal proceeding, there is no absolute right to confrontation. Hearing examiner has the right and the duty to control the conduct of the hearing, and if somebody is being disruptive and thereby prevents themselves from presenting or hearing evidence, that is not a due process violation.
Okay, thank you. That was my only question.
Can I make the motion?
I think there's just a little bit more discussion, but
No,
I have
a question.
I can't. So my
Oh.
thingy is broken, and I can't put my name in the queue. So I have a quick question for staff. In other tenant not in occupancy cases we've heard over the years that I've sat for, there was further evidence presented about electricity meter usage and things like. Now I do understand that the gas is turned off, but there have been people that I've delivered meals to who cook on a hot plate and otherwise choose to live an alternative or a reclusive lifestyle. So are you satisfied that this person has not lived in this unit, and for how long do you think, besides the evidence of the gas, can you highlight for everybody and for us what you think about that?
Yes, as Mr. Mordesai mentioned in his staff report, the landlord made a prima facie showing that that the tenant was not in occupancy. The burden of proof then shifted to him to show that he, in fact, is in occupancy. He presented no evidence of that whatsoever. The basis for the hearing examiner's decision was not simply that the gas was turned off. It was that there was absolutely no evidence of any kind whatsoever offered to show that the tenant actually lives in the unit. As to how long that is true, I couldn't say.
So my concern on behalf of any appellant or any tenant in this case would be, I'm curious as to what protections someone who's perhaps not sophisticated enough to understand the rules at this current time. Has the rent been paid on time every month for all these years? No, we don't need any comments.
That evidence was not in the record.
That evidence is not in the record. So, I mean, I think you see where I'm going. I just want to make sure that someone that the tenants understand the rules, and I understand that, I understand what you're saying, that they did not present a case. I'm thinking ombudsman or, you know, some sort of a, entering a judgment of raising the rent to market rent for this unit is of high consequence to this tenant. So that's why I'm just trying to make certain that we know for a fact that this is not just an isolated year where he chose to use a hot plate. Amy, would you like to?
Yeah, I would just like to explain that our office coordinator, Lima Noseworthy, has extensive conversations with landlords and tenants whenever they have questions about the process, and I know for a fact that Ms. Noseworthy spoke at length with Mr. Marway about the process and what to expect at the hearing.
All right, thank you very much. That answers my question. Commissioner Phillips, if you are.
Can I have a follow-up question for her?
Sure.
And do we feel confident that he understood of his burden in this case?
Well, I think the hearing officer made that clear at the hearing.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Phillips?
I just want to reiterate, like, our job here, I understand that we're trying to explain our reasoning to the public, but at day's end, our job isn't to review this de novo or to potentially find anything in the record. We have to uphold this hearing officer's decision if there's any reasonable basis on which to have met the same conclusion. So to me, this is extremely straightforward. I think we have a very full agenda tonight. I urge my fellow commissioners to vote to deny the appeal and affirm the hearing officer's decision.
Second.
All right, call the vote.
Commissioner Phyllis,
Yes.
Commissioner Duran,
Yes.
Commissioner Flora,
Yes.
Commissioner Trosis,
Yes.
and Commissioner Foster.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Moving on to item 11A. May we have a staff report, please?
Yes. At its March 22 meeting, the board directed staff to draft proposed amendments to Regulation 3120 to do two things. One, codify a requirement that landlords share local assessments rather than passing 100% of them through to their tenants. And two, impose a dollar amount ceiling on per unit surcharges equal to between the 75th and 85th percentile of current surcharges. The proposed amendment included in the staff report does both of these things by adding a new subdivision E to Regulation 3120. It says that for any unit as to which a surcharge is not already barred by existing regulation, the surcharge cannot exceed 1. The total of all surcharges permitted under board regulations divided by the number of units on a parcel plus 1 divided by 12 monthly payments, or $42, whichever is less. In the interest of simplicity and clarity, staff has not recommended a different cap for buildings with different numbers of units. Staff has also not recommended a percentage cap in addition to a dollar amount cap, as the board did not appear to support such an approach. Finally, staff did not recommend any regulatory language concerning subsidies for lower income tenants, as the funds that might be used to pay such subsidies have not currently been approved. The board could, however, revisit the subsidy issue if and when the funds are appropriated if the appropriation itself does not obviate the need for any such regulation. Staff recommends that the board hear from the public, deliberate, and vote on whether to adopt proposed subdivision E as written or with any changes that a majority of the board deems appropriate. Thank you.
All right. We have numerous people coming up to speak. So a couple things we always say when there's a large number of people speaking on the same item is that we hope you will use your time wisely. And if you hear an identical thought to yours coming from a prior speaker, you might state that as such. If not, you may proceed. And I'm going to have you guys line up about 3 at a time against the wall in the interest of time, so everyone's not getting out of their seats and making their way to the microphone. And please try to hold applause and other forms of interruption that make the process take longer. Thank you. And in case some of you, thank you, Commissioner Flora, in case some of you haven't done this before, if you speak on more than one item, your time is reduced on one or another of the items. And I believe the clerk probably explained that to you, as he indicated to me that he did while you were filling out your slips of paper. Catherine Jane, Michael Millman, and Bill Davids are the first three. If you could approach the microphone, please.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Catherine Jane, and I'm part owner in a small business that rents out units in Santa Monica. And first of all, Santa Monica is such a thought leader in so many ways, and it is such an awesome place to live. And you do so many things that are so terrific. And as landlords, we certainly understand the housing shortage, the desirability of having affordable housing. However, squeezing landlords with rent and surcharge restrictions won't work. We need to operate on a reasonable margin of profitability. We have taxes, you know all the expenses, I don't need to go through them, but the unanticipated ones are the more frightening. And you know, if things don't go well, if the math doesn't work, we gotta get out. Clear and simple. If we get out, who's coming in? Potentially larger institutional investors. And they have the financial wherewithal to board up buildings. That happened last time serious rent control came into play. And it added to the housing shortage. And frankly, we need more supply, which means looking at the issue from all sides and not doing anything that could potentially really, really squeeze landlords. As an aside, but I think it's a very important aside, quite wealthy people rent places in Santa Monica, and they're not necessarily, you know, at the high end, and they keep these places as weekend retreats or whatever, and there's a lot of abuse in the system, and I know we're all aware of it, but I think my point today is to look at the issue from all sides and to really make sure it is indeed fair from all sides and that it will work in the long term. Your thought leaders, the eyes of California, depending on what happens with Costa-Hawkins, are going to be looking at Santa Monica. And we want something that's going to work from all sides and that's going to work long term. Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Commissioner Flohr, you have a question, ma'am?
I do have a
Ma'am.
question. I do have a question for you. You're speaking, now you mentioned Costa-Hawkins. This item is regarding the surcharge pass-throughs.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I was making a general point about.
I'll ask you the question that our chairwoman asked an earlier speaker about what are you passing through per month per unit in your situation?
There's somebody over there who
Ballpark.
runs the numbers.
All right.
Do you have a ballpark?
Okay. What I'm going to try to get a sense of from probably each of the speakers is how far above or below the proposal you're being squeezed or not.
I can certainly get those numbers to you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right.
Can I just say?
No,
Okay.
maybe not. Thank you. Mr. Millman.
Good evening. I won't be speaking on this item. It looks like my younger cousin finally showed up. He has a leadership position in the Jewish war veterans and said he couldn't make it, but he came tonight, so he'll speak on this item. But thank you for your time.
Famous other family members. Mr. Davids.
Thank you. Okay. Bad reaction. Anyway, I appreciate your listening to me one more time. I have been coming because I have always been concerned about tenant displacement. And these surcharges have been a tool for tenant displacement. I've already relayed 3 anecdotes about people who've given up their apartments due to the surcharges. I read the report. I have qualms about the methodology that has been arrived at. Some tenants will benefit tremendously. Some tenants will benefit marginally. Some tenants will be awash, and some tenants, based upon that high percentile, might still see their surcharges go up. I have two concerns. I know that I'm in the minority over here. The majority of people here are probably property owners. I know that we're always under threat as tenants, that everything in sight in Santa Monica is going to be Ellis'd, that essentially Santa Monica is going to turn out to be the South Bronx by the Pacific. And if you don't understand the reference, see a forgotten Paul Newman picture called Fort Apache, the Bronx. My greater concern occurred when I correlated something that Councilmember Kevin McEwen told me at the NOMA anniversary meeting, that basically the bond measures that are involved in this are very important to the City Council. And my concern deepened on March 22nd when I heard some property owners indicate that they were going to gather the wherewithal to essentially oppose future bond measures. Now, I'm just a lowly tenant. I've been in Santa Monica now for 27 years, and you get caught up in the politics of tenant-owner relationships. And I'm here speaking on behalf of tenants, specifically the tenants who have been in buildings that have been purchased by multinational banks and by REITs, real estate investment groups. And the solution that has been proposed in the current report, I don't think adequately adjusts the percentile that would protect renters. And I would like the Rent Control Board, the Rent Control Commissioners, to consider the fact that I understand that there are small mom and pop landlords involved in this, but as I indicated in my letter to all of you, we're not in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood anymore. We're not getting an inspirational instruction in sharing. We have had big banks and big real estate investment groups come to Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, and we're all in jeopardy. Anyway, I appreciate your listening. I appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davids. The next three are, if you could take your place on the wall over here, Vivian Alexander, Elizabeth Wagner, Denny Zane. Ms. Alexander, you have 5 minutes.
And Jillian Alexander for the record. So, good evening, commissioners. I'm curious, by a show of hands, which of you are residential tenants in Santa Monica? Thank you. And again, by a show of hands, which of you tenants have resided in the same unit since before 1999?
So an interview is not appropriate for a use of
okay, well,
comment.
I'm aware that none of you have been, and I have been. I moved to Santa Monica in 1998 to secure an affordable residence. As I was aware, my firm that I worked for, the strategy was to exit the line of service within which I worked. In the early 2000s, I made a decision not to buy a home and to continue renting so that I could start my business here in Santa Monica. Those decisions were based on the rent control laws and the terms of my lease agreement. Both tenants and landlords want certainty. It would be inappropriate for the Rent Control Board or any government entity to codify rules which change terms of tenancy. The current proposed formula for so-called sharing real property-related taxes are neither equitable nor fair. Landlords not only receive rents, which cover all of their costs for operating their residential real estate rental businesses, but also realize the appreciation in asset value, which is significantly attributable to community amenities and maintenance, school quality, and a wide variety of city-provided services. In fact, the city itself and Santa Monica College are the two largest local employers. Recognizing that the residents who have voted for the bonds and that the landlords are able to incorporate the related tax expense into their operating expense in determining the new rents for the now decontrolled units when the turnover in tenancy. It seems that either landlords fund 100% of their real property taxes themselves, or that landlords fund 50% of their real property taxes, and that the tenants fund the remaining 50% of real property related taxes on a pro rata basis per tenant headcount, rather than on a prorated basis of tenants per unit, because it's the headcount, it's the people who are here who are actually using all of those services. Consider that a family of 3 with school-aged child gets 3 times the benefit of the services as compared to, let's say, a middle-aged singleton. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have,
Yes, I'm Elizabeth.
just a
Faulkner.
moment, please.
Yes.
Just to clarify, Council Lewis, is what we're trying to consider here legal? Will she allege that we don't have the legal authority?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Alexander. Ms. Wagner, you may begin. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, I would like to make another brief suggestion in addition to the brief suggestion that I made here a month ago, probably less than 3 minutes. In the Rent Control Board memorandum under sharing the burden of local assessments that I looked up online, regarding the surcharge, it was stated the tenant's payment becomes the landlord's money to do with as he or she wishes. And I realize that while that may be the case, it would seem that especially if a tenant's surcharge were to increase quite a bit, there should also then be a requirement that when a landlord needs, I point out, to make repairs, the landlord should then be amenable to suggestions from the tenant with respect to any such repairs. I'm not asking for extreme comfort for the tenant, but I just think maybe that would be a possible suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wagner. All right, Denny Zane. After that, please line up Sonia Sultan, Jennifer Kennedy, and Matthew Millen.
Good evening, members of the Rent Control Board. My name is Denny Zane. I'm speaking here tonight as co-chair of Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights. We have several things I think to offer you with respect to the issue of pass-throughs. First, we wanted to affirm our support for prior decision that you have made, that there should be no pass-throughs increased when there are new owners of a property, and they should be able to calculate in the purchase price of the property any increases in taxes that might result as a consequence of a reappraisal of the property. Further, we affirm our support for your decision that pass-throughs, prior pass-throughs in vacant units are presumed to be rolled into the rent of the new tenant and therefore are not to be added on subsequently. Those are good and fair approaches to those issues. We also urge you to recognize that with respect to past pass-throughs that are already being paid, that there are cases, and a fairly significant number of cases perhaps, that where there is an unfair aggregate pass-through being paid by renters, often as a consequence of a recent purchase of the building and a property owner passing through additional pass-throughs because the property taxes went up because their assessments went up. That is not something we think that really has been fair to tenants. There are other circumstances, for example, in cases where there is maybe just 1 or 2 units where the divisor, if you will, really ensures that there's an excessive pass-through, and that really accumulates over time. We've had, I think, 9 some measures that have been approved. So we would like to urge you to cap the aggregate pass-throughs for those pass-throughs which have already been approved. and cap it at about $40 a month or 4%, whichever is the lower. Now that would mean people with rents under $1,000 might pay less than $40 a month, and people over that would pay a $40 cap if you adopted that policy. It seems close, I think, to some of what your staff has suggested at the moment. With respect to future pass-throughs, we really want to affirm our belief that the board does in fact have the authority, the full authority to adopt future pass-throughs for future measures or already adopted measures that may not yet have been passed through, like Measure V, for example. I don't think there was any intent when Measure GA was adopted or put before voters to make any change whatever in the pass-through policies or in what the charter provided for that, nor do we think that the reading of the language as we see it would alter your course, and that we think that you should adopt a policy that you can affirm pass-throughs in the future. But we do urge you, following on our this earlier recommendation, that you also provide a cap, and we suggest $4 a month per new measure per unit be a additional cap going forward on new pass-throughs. Now, we recognize that there are board members who have some discomfort about affirming that authority. We would like to let you know that we are willing to join you in urging the council to put clarifying language on the ballot so that there is no future debate about this issue. It's once and for all clarified. But we strongly believe that you should affirm that authority now and adopt approach to, for example, measures E, S, and V, that you do have the authority, or in a future measure that you do have the authority, but would like clarifying language in the charter. That, I think, is a reasonable approach, and that's what we urge you to do tonight. There are other members of the SMER Executive Committee who might speak to you on related issues, but I thank you for your service, and I look forward to your deliberation.
Thank you. All right, Sonia Sultan, you've requested 2 minutes.
Good evening. These topics are very important to everybody in our community. Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights is our big focus is protecting tenants, but we also are members of the community. We care deeply about the entire community. We feel we're all in this together. We care about the schools and other community resources and feel that we all have a stake in them. So I think the position that we have developed after extensive analysis, legal analysis, analysis of the history of the rent board measures, including GA, and we feel strongly that in order to, that we want a balanced decision, and we hope that you will support one. We feel strongly that that the tenants who have been hard hit by these, having their buildings bought for exorbitant amounts and then getting hit with huge pass-throughs need relief, and they need relief now. And therefore, we are urging that all pass-throughs be capped, and that and our suggestion is $40, because this would leave probably 75% of the pass-throughs that are currently being passed through unchanged, but it will roll back the pass-throughs that have become so excessive because of recent reevaluations. We also recommend that the cap be $40, including Measure ES, which hasn't been passed through, but we took into consideration, including ES. And that there also be a 4% limit, so that, I don't know why I only get 2 minutes. I was expecting a little more time.
That's what was checked. I'm just sorry. That's.
Uh-oh.
Well, okay. I'd
Okay.
like to ask you to finish your thought.
Okay, thank you. And that we, as Mr. Zane said, after very careful and extensive analysis, and we believe that there was no intention when Measure GA was put on the ballot to eliminate pass-through authority. We believe that in looking at the overall charter that you do have that implied authority, and we hope that you will recognize that. If you would feel more comfortable with a ballot measure to confirm that authority with a cap to protect tenants, we would be supportive of that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Would you like more time? You're entitled to it
Thank
if you choose.
Maybe I'll just come back later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Appreciate all your hard work and careful deliberation.
Thank you, Ms. Sultan. We have Jennifer Kennedy and then Matthew Millen, Michael Tarbett, and Michael Soloff. Jennifer Kennedy has also requested just 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Might not even be 2 minutes. I just came here today because I wanted to say that I support the proposal that Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights put before you. And I'll say ditto, ditto to everything that Denny Zane and Sonia Sultan said to you before me. I hope that you will also support this proposal. It is sound and fair and enables the board to take action to provide immediate relief to the tenants who received massive monthly increases due to property reassessments. The proposal to add a cap, as stated in our document, supports long-term tenants and is consistent with the board's mission. I simply urge you to ask staff questions about the $40, 4%, or $4 proposal, and wanted to point out that I believe this cap is a better method than the +1 method that was suggested in your staff report, and perhaps it's easier to administer. And having been a prior board member and an active member of Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights for a long time, the +1 idea is something that has made its way through many community meetings and board meetings and discussions, and I think that the proposal that SMERS presented is actually a little more sound and fair at this point under all of the circumstances. I also wanted to say, again, please check with your staff, ask them questions about the document you received from SMER. Thank you very much for your consideration. And if you, I just wanted to also point out that it is page 4 of the proposal by SMER, number 1 at the top where it says ballot measures, which highlights where Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights feels that you do have the authority to implement the cap. And if you wanted to reference it, I just wanted to point out to you that it was on page 4. And again, thank you very much for the good work you're doing and doing on behalf of tenants.
Ms. Kennedy,
Yes.
Commissioner Flora has a question for you.
Sure.
Yeah, I wanted to ask this at least of one of you. The 4%, the 40 or 4% idea, I trust that you all saw in the staff report that for some people, even that 4% for low rents could actually be an increase in pass-through dollars.
It's whichever's lower. It's whichever is lower.
Yeah, but
So-
if it's below 4% now,
It's
that
my
there's a-
understanding that this cap is not going to raise the amount that any tenant pays in pass-throughs.
Okay.
And on top of that, imposing the cap will not lower the amount of the pass-through for the vast majority of landlords. So this
No,
is
I
something.
agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely something that you should, talk with your fellow commissioners about
Yeah.
and ask staff about.
All right. Thank you for coming out.
Yeah, thank
really
you so much.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Commissioner Kennedy. Matt Millen, you've requested 2 minutes.
Thank you. So I'd just like to read something into a record that a tenant sent in, which is, we consider it our civic duty to support education and help sustain Santa Monica Malibu School District and the Santa Monica College. As such, we are willing to pay our fair share to support the schools and future generations. So a lot of tenants are in favor of paying these pass-throughs. The +1 idea was put forth because of complaints that the tenants were paying everything and the landlord wasn't paying anything. So by +1, the landlord pays a portion of it. The issue I raised tonight is I live in my own 5-unit building. Therefore, there should be, if you do the +1, there should be an exception for owner-occupied owners who live in their building, because I'm already paying 1/5. It's a 5-unit building. I only pass through 4/5 of it, I have to pay the other fifth myself, because it's only four tenants. So if you do the +1, I'm asking you to make an exception for owner-occupied buildings. They shouldn't, I would have to pay double, you know, I'd be paying. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Millen. Michael Tarbett and Michael Soloff, and if the clerk could bring up the next item slip so I can get ready. All right. Mr. Tarbett, you've requested 2 or 3 minutes?
2.
2.
Hi. Michael Tarbett, live in the Pico neighborhood. I've been with Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights since 1978. So we sent a document into you, and it's told you what our position is. I can't even count the number of hours that was spent working on this. It is an effort that I've never seen before in SMER on getting to a position. So I want you to know it's important to us. It's important to us. So I don't have much to say myself. My colleagues right behind me has all the thought on the numbers.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Tarbett. And Michael Soloff.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm here tonight speaking solely on behalf of myself, not my law firm, not the Housing Commission, not my wife, not SMER. However, I do agree with the SMER proposal. It incorporates the protections you've already put in place, and it adds to it a reasonable cap that both limits the absolute amount and also limits the percentage of rent. So that as long as the absolute amount is reasonable, that's fine. But if a particular tenant, particularly some of these long-term tenants who's paying much lower rent, it's capped at 4% of the rent. And if you look at the email that was sent in by SMER, there's some numerical examples that illustrates how that works. It would not increase anybody's share. And I think that that's fair because I think there are two things. One is, notwithstanding what's said in the staff report, that when you're talking about whether to pass through a new surcharge, you are talking about who's going to pay for it. Take ES, for example. If you don't let the landlords pass any of that through, then the existing tenants will not be paying any of it because they can't. There's no other way for the landlords to raise their rent and capture that. If, on the other hand, you pass it through 100% to the tenants, then they will be paying all of it. That will be new revenue to the landlords covering that cost. It'll all come out of the pockets, new costs to the tenants. And you can find some sort of sharing. I also disagree with the staff report that the proper way to think about the landlord's benefit is that it's no different than what an individual tenant is getting. There's a huge difference. Landlords, as I said last time, get an economic benefit because when you've got great schools and great college and all the other great things in Santa Monica, it allows you to charge higher rents, at least so long as there's vacancy decontrol, and we'll talk about that under a different item. In any event, they get an economic benefit. It's a completely different kind of benefit. But I support the SMER position that at the end of the day, as long as the amount is reasonable, it's proper and in fact consistent with the purpose of rent control that tenants should pay a share of new taxes that are put in as long as it's reasonable. The point of rent control is to keep people, renters, in their homes as long-term members of our community, and long-term members of our community, just like everybody else, should contribute to that. They get to vote on it, and I think that's all appropriate. But it's also appropriate that if it goes beyond what's reasonable, given that one of your main purposes is to prevent unreasonable rent increases, that be kept with the landlord. Okay. So the only other thing I wanted to address in here is this question about, can you pass things through? Because SMER has also made the proposal that there should be a cap for future pass-throughs at $4 absolutely, and that the combination of all pass-throughs not exceed 4% of rent. And I'll just offer a couple of observations. One is I don't think that you can look at the history of Measure GA and say that there was anybody who ever expressed the view that you were eliminating the power of the Rent Control Board to do these surcharges. There's nothing in the staff report from everybody who's participated in its reports. It never happened. There's no indication that the counsel for the Rent Control Board told you, the board that the staff told them that the city attorney told anybody that. I've looked at the ballot measure. I've looked at the impartial analysis. The city attorney said the purpose of this is to change the charter, and I'll give you the quote here. In order to change the way that the Rent Control Board establishes the annual general adjustment of rent ceilings. Then it says that the formula that the Rent Control Board currently utilizes to compute the general adjustment is known as the component ratio to gross rent formula. And then it says the proposed measure would establish a new adjustment formula that, quote, would tie the general adjustment to the inflation rate by basing adjustment on 75% of CPI. Basic point is what the voters were being told is that we have this formula calculating the general rent. They identified what it was, general adjustment, and that's being replaced. And your regulations, the reports from the staff, all show in this methodology that this was excluded the surcharges. Your regulations talking about something different, and the report specifically says it. So there was no actual intent by anybody, including the voters. So that leaves you with the question of whether somehow it's inimical to the purposes of the rent control statute to allow these surcharges, because so many landlords, thanks to vacancy decontrol, are doing better than the 1978 rents and adjustments. And to reach that conclusion, you have to assume that the specific portions of the charter, which prior to Measure GA allowed the Rent Control Board to
I'd like to ask you to finish your thought.
Okay. That allowed the Rent Control Board to add charges, both surcharges and general adjustments, to all these landlords who were doing better than the 1978 rents, that provision was inimical to the rent control laws. And it was at a time when before GA, the Rent Control Board specifically had the authority to do different categories. So if there was some category where they thought people were making too much and that somehow was necessary to the purposes, they could have done that. They also had this specific charge under subsection E to act in accordance with the purposes of the rent control law, even with that. To
Order in the room, please.
So the assertion that another way to look at it, instead of saying is that the rent control charter is internally inconsistent, is that this was consistent, it was fair to pass these specific local voter approved taxes on to the tenants, and therefore if that's true, then you still have that power.
Thank you very much. To clarify the rules, when a commissioner asks a further question of any speaker during any public comment period, they are entitled to finish the question to the commissioner's satisfaction. Just to clarify the rule. Thank you very much. Now we do have 2 late chits for this item, so that we need to accept that by a consensus. We've had 2 late chits.
I'll give them a minute each.
1 minute each is the proposal?
Yeah. We have a ton of people on Costa Hawkins.
I understand. I'm just waiting to hear from 2 other people for consensus. Can't hear you.
2 minutes, 1 to 2 minutes is fine. I could go to 2, but that's fine.
Commissioner Duran, Commissioner Tarosis, can you please chime in?
I can go to 2 minutes.
1 minute.
You're the
90 seconds. And we have Sharon Hagan and Doug Tung or Turg. I can't, it's either T-U-N-G or T-U-R-G. Ms. Hagan, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. Thank you, commissioners. Since I'm here anyway, I thought, and because I brought this up actually to you guys at least 2 years ago, I'm very grateful that you've taken this so seriously. And I personally am not opposed at all as a tenant to pay for the amenities in Santa Monica. I do think 50% passed on to the landlords is fair. I'm glad that you are considering putting a cap on this. In my own case, I moved in to my current home in 2009 at top of the market rent at the time. And in my lease, there was no mention at all of any pass-throughs. And I moved here from Venice under rent control in Venice, so I had no idea that these things, were possible in Santa Monica. And so I was very shocked after the end of this 1-year period to get a $78 a month rent increase plus paying for the fees for the rent control board. It's been very difficult for me because I'm A, disabled, and B, retired, to come up with that money, but I like living in Santa Monica. I've lived here all my life in this area. And I was confused about why you guys put a 2012 limit on considering these things, seeing as how in 2009.
Thank you
this is
very
the
much,
situation.
Ms.
Thank
Hagan.
you very much.
Commissioner Trosas has a question.
Yeah, I think actually would benefit everyone. Can we get staff to clarify why we're considering 2012 as why we've selected that date?
Well, the board hasn't selected anything yet, but the reason that there's a discussion about that is because that was the year that Measure GA was enacted.
Thank you. Mr. Tung.
Hi, my name is Doug Tung. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'll make this quick. I'm a small landlord here in Santa Monica. I have one 4-unit apartment building. I've had it since 2012. For me, and I would imagine many other small owners, the strategy or mechanism to use dollar caps is very punitive for the smaller owner. In the case of, in my case, I divide the pass-throughs, the bond measure taxes and whatnot, by 4 for the 4 units. So just looking at the last one I filed, and it's approximately a surcharge of around $62. I think it's an inappropriate strategy to use a dollar cap, because neither the landlords or the tenants have any control necessarily other than their vote over what bond measures will be passed in the future. The operating principle needs to be that we as owners as well as tenants all have some benefit and some stake in the results of these bond measures. In the case of tenants, they have the ability to vote for these bond measures. Because I also live in Santa Monica, I happen to get to vote. But if I didn't live in Santa Monica, I wouldn't even have a say in this. We do not have control over the bond measures. We don't know what they're going to be in the future. So there should not be any mechanism in place that arbitrarily restricts what might happen in the future. I think it's reasonable to have the landlord support some portion of the costs, but a straight dollar cap doesn't reflect fairly for the smaller landowners.
Thank you
It might
very
make sense for larger
Thank you very
apartments.
much. All right, that concludes public comment for this item. We thank everyone who stayed to give their thoughts and opinions on this item. We're going to enter into a board discussion now, and we have Commissioner Flora first up to give commentary.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. First, that's actually exactly what we're trying to do. For the first time, actually share some portion of the cost. I just want to quickly point out that whether we adopt the staff report or whether we adopt the alternative put forward by Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights or something else entirely, we're looking at, between the SMER proposal and the staff report, somewhere between 75 to 80% of the word escapes me. Median percentile, the 75th and 80th percentile. It's not even that late yet, which means really most of you in this room, unless like Mr. Tung, you bought your building within the last 6 years, really are not going to be affected. We're not taking anything from you. We're not doing anything to you. The second speaker of the evening said he was passing through somewhere between $40 and $50. So if we assume that number is 45 and we adopt the staff proposal, yes, we are taking something from him, about $12 a month. Most of you will not be affected. If you've been scared into thinking you will be, look at the numbers, chances are you're probably not going to be affected. If you bought your building fairly recently and are now charging some of your tenants $100+ a month in pass-throughs, yeah, we're probably going to ask you to start paying some of the share yourselves. So this is not a victimization, I think, of very many, but unfortunately, Mr. Tung, in an attempt to really keep some people in place that are actually, I think hundreds of tenants, if not thousands, are being affected by these massive monthly increases in surcharges due to bond valuations. We really do need to act, and I think we're really overdue in acting despite our sense of urgency these last few months. So that's just what I want to say right there at the outset, is that we really are helping those that are most in need without affecting the vast majority of property owners. Secondly, I was a co-sponsor and co-author of Measure GA. Most of what Stephen has said, I think, in the discussion about what we can do about future pass-throughs has seemed to be, in my memory, consistent with the advice we were given at the time. Did you have some? Oh, okay. The advice we were given at the time, when Bill Winslow and I formed a subcommittee and wanted to do something about the general adjustment. But what we were also told was something akin to, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, that we would be able to do 75% of the CPI plus some adjustment for the pass-throughs. It was very amorphous and very generic, but we were definitely given a belief that we could do something with the pass-throughs. Maybe it would be an additional percentage of CPI or something. So I can tell you, yes, I'm one of the people that did it. That I can tell you that the authors were certainly under the impression that we were going to be giving some flexibility to future voters. With that, I really do want to yield my time to hear from other colleagues, because I am actually open-minded between the two proposals, but I just want to say I think it's more than just to be looking at a dollar amount cap in that somewhere between 75th and 80th percentile. The time to act really is now for so many tenants that have seen their pass-throughs go from somewhere between $400 to $1,400 in a year just in these last few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Flora. Commissioner Phyllis.
So I want to thank everyone who's come out tonight. I know that this is an important issue that affects tenants and landlords alike, and that it's been an issue of concern to all of us on the board for quite some time now. So this has been a real community effort, and I want to acknowledge everyone who's contributed thus far. I think this item has been tricky for a lot of reasons, including the fact that we want to affirm our support of good schools and good colleges and the way that it enriches our community. And we also want to protect our tenants who are in a fundamentally different place than property owners, in that they do not hold equity in our community, and therefore they have a fundamentally different bundle of rights than someone who owns property that can be passed down and grow in value in a way that a tenancy simply cannot. When I look at the staff report, there are a couple things that stand out to me, and I want to articulate what I think is kind of the path through this, and then open it up to my fellow board members. I agree that up until 2012, we absolutely had the power, the clear authority to pass through voter indebtedness and bonds. I agree that in 2012, when Measure GA was implemented, that no one intended to to displace that authority, to remove that authority, although that language was removed from our charter, which is a really tricky issue. I think we're faced. So for those bonds up until 2012, I think it's absolutely clear that they should be subject to some sort of restriction. I support a $40 cap. On a going forward basis, to ensure that the authority to regulate these pass-throughs is absolutely enshrined in the Rent Control Charter Amendment, and to kind of adopt the SMER recommendation number 2, which is confirm this in a ballot measure. I support a 2018 ballot measure that would make absolutely clear that the Rent Control Board has the authority to regulate pass-throughs, consistent with the language, I believe, in the first part of item 12A. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I do think a ballot measure component is essential to my motion, to where I'm at, so I want to make it very clear. And I would also ask that that ballot measure include suggestive language about what future bond initiatives should look like with regard to disclosures about tenant responsibility for voter indebtedness. I think that kind of comes to a happy medium in that we confirm the board's authority, we confirm tenant support for good schools and good colleges, and the fundamental role that education plays in a thriving democracy, and I think we can do it quickly, and I think we can do it in a way that's fair to landlords, where 80% of the landlords who are likely here tonight will see, roughly 80% if we do about a $40 cap, will see no change at all in the way that pass-throughs are being implemented. I think that it really kind of drives at the real issue, which are the people who've seen these massive increases in the past year. So where I'm at is just to restate my position. It's very consistent with kind of the SMER option number 2, which is recognizing the authority of the Rent Control Board to regulate rents up until 2012, confirming the authority on a going forward basis, including for future bond measures, which I think also could include a $4 increase for future bond measures. I'm in support of that as well, to make sure that landlords aren't overly strapped if we implement new bond measures. And I would like a unique ballot measure specifically tailored just to this pass-through issue to enshrine our authority in the charter.
Thank you. Commissioner Torosis?
Okay. I too think that this has been a difficult issue, and definitely one where I've talked with a lot of the members of our community, and I certainly see both sides of this. I think that as someone who moved to Santa Monica, who's not originally from here, one of the reasons that Santa Monica is so attractive is because of the amenities that we have here, because of our good schools, our clean streets, our great city services, and I want to be able to continue to maintain that. And I also think that when tenants are paying a portion of that, they have a stake in the community and the outcome. And I certainly wanted to join the Rent Control Board because I think it is so important that people are able to maintain their stability, age in place, contribute to the community, whether they're owners or renters, because we know that for many in Southern California, the dream of home ownership is not as attainable as it once was. So I think that we need to be able to protect our renters, but we need to make it feasible for landlords and good landlords to continue to operate, whether they're small or larger, et cetera. And I certainly hear everyone's comments. I, too, am in strong support of a cap on pass-throughs. Like was alluded to by my fellow commissioner, Santa Monica, up until we took action, was the only jurisdiction that allowed 100% pass-through to tenants. So again, the notion of sharing was not an option. It was 100% pass-through to tenants. And I do think that landlords need to share some of that burden, especially as it's an investment and one that appreciates and that you could build equity in. So I'm in support of a cap. I think this is consistent with what I said at the last meeting. I was comfortable around the 75 to 80 percentile, and so I'm supportive of a $40 cap or a 4% increase, whichever is lower. So I would affirm that. I would also state that while I do think there is a reasonable argument that we have the authority post 2012 to allow for pass-throughs, it's not it's not a clear and convincing argument for me. And I think that in order to affirm our authority to pass through and to continue to put forth ballot measures that support our schools, I too would support a ballot initiative to clarify our authority and show our strong support for the amenities in this community. And I think that I would support either a $4 or $5 incremental increase for any future ballot measures that we passed after we hopefully clarify our authority in our ballot initiative. I don't know if were there any other items to address. Those are my points for now.
Okay, I'm gonna chime in at this point. You're not ready to yet. Okay, so. Since other commissioners have already kind of waxed poetic on things I already agree with, I want to mention a couple of other things. I'm a big believer in real world examples and trying to be relatable to all parties who are interested in listening to these meetings. No business in any city, in any jurisdiction in America has total advanced knowledge of what's coming down the road in terms of fees or regulations or new laws or changes in politics from year to year to year. However, if I sign a lease on a car with Ford Motor Company for X dollars per month, even if they get assessed some fee or fine or some law changes 2 years into my lease, they can't come and, for instance, change the terms of the price of my monthly lease. It's a risk that they take as an entrepreneurial endeavor to be in business that you cannot always anticipate changes in your fee structure and the costs that are coming your way. I do agree, and I've come a long way on this issue in the 2 years I've been looking at it, as to a sharing, an equitable sharing between a property owner and a tenant on things that are voted on. And I think it's important to remember that the rent control agency covers certain things, and it's all dictated by a very narrow set of statutes. We don't count heads in apartments, for instance, so we could never create a policy, for instance, that's per head because we don't count heads. We have no idea how many people are living in a given unit, a studio or a 4-bedroom. We don't track that. We don't have that knowledge whatsoever, so we would not be able to administer, something like that to that level of detail. Someone proposed square footage one time. Again, we are not privy to the square footage of units. We do bedrooms, and we do dates of commencement of tenancy, and that's it. And we are limited in some of the things I think that landlords and sometimes tenants think that we can or can't or should or shouldn't do. We are limited by some of the parameters that govern what we do. So when it comes to this issue, the economics are clear. There is no doubt in any of the data I've looked at over the course of 2 years, and all of the hours and hours and hours of I also can't count the number of hours spent researching this issue on your behalf, because that's what we're elected to do. That's what expert staffs are employed to do. That's what constituent groups, whether it be landlord associations, tenant associations, school boards, that's what they, you might be a plumber or an accountant or a school teacher or a stay-at-home mom. You're not an expert, and so we're supposed to aggregate these thoughts and these pieces of information for you, and bring them forth in a public setting where we listen to you. We read your letters. We got almost 100 emails and letters this time from tenants and landlords, some of whom are here, some of whom are not, and chose to submit their thoughts that way. I wanted to spend my time tonight talking to you about just the practical realities of what we can do, what we're going to do, and why, because I think it's important. So where I'm at on this, I am absolutely in favor of a cap, and the reason is because what's already been stated, again, so a real estate example, if you fall in the 50th or 60th percentile, and by the way, if a landlord's going to come and speak, I would imagine they would know where they fall in the economics of this issue. So if by the chart that's in the staff report, you see that your pass-throughs are in fact, near these medians that we're proposing, then you would realize that you won't be affected at all. And the property tax pass-throughs that tenants have been paying up to this point, that they've been accustomed to paying up to this point, for many people, depending on the cap number that we arrive at, will not change. And the reason we feel okay with that, for my part, is that you made certain decisions about setting rents, assuming you could pass it through. And so we have acknowledged that. I have acknowledged that. Other groups in the community have come here publicly and stated that they acknowledge that. So for the property owners out there, we acknowledge that you did things under a certain understanding. And so we are trying to honor that as best we can and balance that with our responsibility to the lessee of that Ford motor car who signed a lease thinking and it's a private contract between the two of you. And so these unexpected surcharges whizzing in and out of the ether as you speculate on your buildings or not, are not the responsibility ultimately of these tenants. It's a business choice and a business endeavor, and it's a risk that all of us who own businesses take. But in the interest of fairness, as I hope you can see, we are trying to preserve a great chunk of that voter indebtedness. So with all that long-winded stuff being said, I am in favor of a cap. I'm actually in favor of a lower cap than $40. I feel that if it's only the pre-2012 measures we're talking about for this cap, I just personally don't like to start at such a high threshold upon which other things are going to build. However, the 4% offering of an idea, which would be sort of a catch-all for anyone who might be adversely affected disproportionately, and by that I mean unfairly, by a speculative change, I am in favor of the 4% accompaniment to a cap. I am in favor of a lower cap. I'm really in love with the idea of more of a $30 to $35 cap. I think it's more equitable since we're probably going to be adding on others in the future. However, I'm willing to see the light on that and adjust somewhere in that. I would ask the board's indulgence to entertain the notion of something slightly less than $40. I'd like to quickly ask staff a detailed question about implementation of a 4% option because your staff report didn't favor that. And I do believe in our agency's ability to do mathematical computations and to present a worksheet to landlords and owners accompanied by seminars teaching them how to do it as part of their business paperwork, which every business has to do. What would implementation of a 4% option look like on a landlord's worksheet?
Well, we haven't actually penciled that out. I think we would be able to do that. We would, they'd have to have what the rent is and then the calculation of 4% of the rent and know what their surcharges are and take if their surcharges are less than the cap or the 4% was lower, they would choose between the two.
So it would look
for
like
many, as you've said, would not be impacted by this at all because their surcharges are already lower than the caps that you're talking about. So we would figure it out, but we haven't walked through that yet.
Okay.
But we would need a little time. So if the board wants to implement this, our recommendation would be that it be implemented with the next general adjustment increase so that it would be, we'd have time to work that out and educate the public about how this has changed and have it go into effect when owners are already doing notices of change.
Later this summer.
Right. Usually those notices are given out in the beginning of August for increases in September.
So to finalize where I'm at, so that's where I'm at a cap of, I'm in favor more of a cap of about $30 to $35. And I'd like to hear any thoughts short of 40, if anyone has any. I might be in the minority on there and I might not. In regards to, and again, not to, like Nicole Phillips said, not to jump ahead to the next measure, but I do see a way forward to implement this, and I agree with Commissioner Flora. I do think this is something we've been mandated to do. I do think it's the intent of the rent control law to administer these things fairly and as they come up. As such, well, I guess I'll limit my comments on the ballot measure to the ballot measure because I'm not necessarily convinced that we should place an absolute dollar amount on things we haven't seen yet. The value of such a bond proposal or how many hundreds of millions of dollars it is, or I think before you've seen the amount, I don't know if I'm completely convinced to cap the amount in advance, but I'm definitely willing to get this done one way or the other. And those are the extent of my comments. Thank you for indulging me. Commissioner Duran, since you haven't had a chance to speak yet, would you like to jump in and then we'll go to Commissioner Trosis?
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner Trosis. Well, as a starting point, what I'd like to acknowledge and state is that over the past couple of months, the past several meetings where we've discussed this issue, we've heard, I think, an evolution of thought, and I want to acknowledge that first, that we've heard both from landlords, we've heard both from tenants, landlord representatives, tenant representatives, and they've all come to the same conclusion that sharing in the responsibility is a fair thing. So I think that that's a great starting point. And that takes me to, okay, so having said that and having had everyone state to some degree that is where, or they would like to see us go, the next step for me is to determine, okay, what's fair in making that decision. Now we've heard about, adding on another unit, so to speak, to get a divisional fraction. Maybe that's it. We've heard a lot of talk about caps. I was in favor of a cap, and I believe at the last meeting, I was talking about the 75 to 80 percentile. I hadn't considered or thought about the 4% amount that was discussed this evening. And so I didn't think of it. So my thought is that although I'm sure that it was well thought through and well planned to come to us with the idea of a $40 cap and a 4%, $4 per measure per unit idea, I'd like to see if staff could crunch the numbers just to confirm that those seem to be viable before I will. I'd like to see what those numbers come out in another analysis.
Can I address?
Sure.
May I?
Yes, please.
So we provided in our staff report on Exhibit D the percentile of rents within the city of all controlled units. And the 20th percentile of rents is $1,020. So that means that only 20% of the units would be affected by a 4% cap. That would only apply to 4% of all of the units at this time, if that helps.
Okay.
Inform your consideration.
Thank you. Yeah, it does. The other issue was the ballot initiative and whether we have a clear authority to move forward with that. And I'm reminded of my law school days, the penumbra of laws, right? Anyway, what authority do we have when we don't have express authority? So I feel comfortable that we have the authority based on my research of the issue and the history that we've done here over the years. But to satisfy those who are less sure about that, I would be open to having a ballot initiative to make it crystal clear. And since there's at least a couple of commissioners who feel that would make them feel better, then I would support that as well. So the other issue is just as I listened to Chair Foster's proposal that $30 or $35 is where she is more aligned to. It just made me question, why is it the $40? Why the 75, 80 percentile seems to be the number that everybody is considering, and why not a lower number? What does that do to affect the fairness for the tenants and for the landlords? So I think I'd like to get some more analysis as to why the $40 amount and not something less. Those are my thoughts for now.
Thank you. Commissioner Trosis.
I think we had stated at our last meeting that we were comfortable with something. I know I stated around the 75th to 80th percentile.
I stated lower.
And yeah, that's fine. I think that the way I see it, just speaking for myself, we already put in place an initiative to phase out pass-throughs entirely on a going forward basis, right? So that's going to stop the bleeding, if you will, on a going forward basis. But then we have this issue, as I see it, of a minority of tenants who are exorbitantly affected by these extremely high pass-throughs. And I think that those are the people, to me, that I'm interested in helping. But then at the end of the day, I don't want to completely change the rules, if you will, for these landlords who had already relied on these pass-throughs when deciding whether to purchase their buildings, etc. So to me, equity is, allowing a majority of the pass-through for the ones previous to the day that we put in effect our regulation to continue, but to make sure that they're not so exorbitantly expensive, and therefore the cap at the 75 to 80 felt a little bit more comfortable for me. So I'm still at $40.
Commissioner Phyllis.
So I think I see a way forward on this tonight, if my fellow commissioners will indulge me. It seems like there's a some appetite for a cap. The dollar amount seems to go between, I think, $30 on the low end from Commissioner Foster to $40 on the higher end, which I support. I think there's at least some interest across the board. I also would like to see the idea of a 4% alternative minimum cap fleshed out from staff. So I would like staff to, I understand this, I really appreciate the proposal that we received from Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights, but I understand that it came in relatively late. So my proposal is to my fellow commissioners is that we ask staff to come up with language that enshrines that proposal, explores between $30 to $40 for the cap, and then also addresses a companion ballot measure, which is just this, to me, which would just be this language from 1803 on 12A, does not address Costa-Hawkins at all.
Is it
On
the last,
12A,
the last
yeah.
page of the staff report?
The last page of the staff report, which is just enshrining the authority to regulate rents, and I would like that to also be the second part of any solution on pass-throughs, is that we have the cap and then we have the confirming ballot measure language, and I would like to see a proposal from staff come back with that for a final hearing at our next meeting, really fleshing out the significance of a difference between $30 and $40, especially given this 2012 limit. And I think by that point we could all probably get comfortable. It seems like we're really close to a solution, but that with a little bit more fine tuning we could get there rather than legislating on the dais. So with some support from my commissioners, I think I would give staff that direction, and then we bring it back for our May meeting for final resolution.
May I ask a question
Yeah.
about that? I'm not sure what is meant by fleshing out the different amounts. I mean, there is in the staff report a showing of what those surcharges would be and how people would be affected by it. I'm not sure what we would provide. What sort of thing would you looking
Sure,
for
I can
beyond that?
give you a little bit more information. So specifically,
Maybe number of properties.
Yeah, I mean, just a little bit more information. The number of properties, really kind of honing in on this range between $30 and $40, talking about the different number of properties affecting, talking about specifically how this difference, a $10 difference, which doesn't seem huge to us, may specifically impact owners who have a smaller number of units on the property, which is something that's not necessarily baked into this analysis. And something that we heard from members of the public tonight. I think we're really close on the numbers. I don't think there's quite consensus here yet tonight, and I would prefer not to legislate on the dais. So given a narrower range, a 4% alternative minimum, and a companion ballot measure, I think those are kind of the three ingredients that I think I feel like there's relative support for on this dais to get us to yes.
One more question. I also am not clear on what is meant by a companion ballot measure. Do you want to adopt the regulations now? I don't mean now, right now, but I mean in this current process, or I mean those are two separate things.
Yeah,
right?
no, I can tell you exactly what I mean.
Okay.
So I think we should, and the proposal is coming back that we adopt the regulations now, and then we confirm the express language in a ballot measure for 2018. Yes, but what I'm asking for as a resolution to this item, because I don't think we're quite ready to vote, because I think that it does involve some legislative from the dais, I think we're all relatively uncomfortable with that, is a 3-part solution that incorporates these elements. 1, the dollar amount cap between the $30 to $40 range. 2, the alternative minimum percentage at about 4%. And 3, this language, just the 1803 portion that from 12A. Those are the 3 things I would really like to see on our May agenda. And then I think we can get to an agreement on the dollar amount details then. Yeah.
Yes, you may, but I just want a legal ruling on whether or not we need to separate the third item out until maybe pending discussion of 12A.
No, because we can give direction to staff at any time, and I'm proposing it as direction for staff coming back at the next meeting. It's already been a public hearing, so I'm not proposing that we vote on it tonight.
Right.
I'm not saying that we should do it tonight. I'm saying this is part of the solution that I see general support for on the board.
Commissioner Trosis wanted to add something?
Yeah, I mean, the only I agree with what Commissioner Phyllis said. I think the only alternative that I've thought about is that each ballot initiative clearly states the percentage or the dollar cap to be borne by tenants. So instead of us deciding that unilaterally for each ballot initiative that we will allow a $4 increase, that the voters know what they're voting on, and it's expressed similar to what San Francisco does as to if the amount would be passed through, what the maximum amount to be passed through per ballot initiative would be.
And I'm open to addressing that in our kind of
next discussion.
Conclusion,
right.
Meaning to address this kind of tripartite solution.
Right, and I think that affects the chapter 16, this new chapter in 1803.
Commissioner Duran.
I believe that Commissioner Phyllis said what I tried to say in a much more eloquent manner than I was able. So I would support, or I guess I don't know if we need that or not, but if we do, I would support what Commissioner Phyllis suggested take place, and that we come back at the next meeting with something that I think we would be ready to vote on and finalize.
Commissioner Flora.
You know, I know we really do need to act on behalf of these tenants out there just paying these exorbitant fees. But I am willing to wait till our next meeting. If it really gets us to a cap number we can all be satisfied with, I'd be willing to go slightly lower along with Commissioner Foster. But if you guys think it really needs more, I wouldn't mind seeing how many buildings are affected and where the...
And more public comment.
Yeah. But my concern about this is we're about to go into a debate on a potential ballot measure, and you're going to hear from me on that much sooner than you think. Do we really want the possibility of 2? And will people really understand this as a ballot measure? Versus, and I was never really a big fan of going with the outside counsel, but should this 1803 portion really be something we debate as part of 12B?
I mean, so I can
Like, do we do the outside counsel or a ballot measure? Shouldn't that be debated within 12B?
So here's my, because I was the one
really
who
am
had
asking.
requested outside counsel. I think if we can get comfortable with this solution, it kind of get comfortable with kind of this 3-pronged approach, which is implement the cap, so adopt the regulations, implementing the cap now, do it on the kind of the terms set forth with this range of dollar amounts that we need to really, really understand the specific details of, and then confirm our authority in a ballot measure, because I think it's a good governance thing. I think we want this authority super clear, and I think there is I don't think landlords are going to oppose it, because I think landlords do want us to have the authority to pass things through. I think also tenants will support it, because as tenants have always supported bonds, and whether they're school bonds or college bonds, I think it reflects our commitment as a community to these ideals of educational democracy. So I really do see it as a tripartite solution, and I just want to make clear that if we can kind of get to that, then I think it resolves any concern that I had about.
You mean tabling it, perhaps?
I would withdraw the independent counsel if we could get to that.
My concern, having gone through FS, another measure I sponsored, which was pretty cut and dry. Renters, we're going to cut the registration fee in half. That was clouded so that renters were confused, and it barely passed. What do you think they're going to do with this?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you.
What I'm saying is there's risk in putting up, when the default on initiatives is to vote no, and this can be clouded, we're putting ourselves in a position, and then people are talking about wanting to put a specific dollar amount of what it would be. Well, we don't know how big a bond would be.
No one suggested a dollar amount.
Well, no, I thought you said we should
No.
have a specific dollar amount. Okay, well, I'm saying to us, it's just a clarifying administrative issue. To some people out there with money, this could get really messy, and we could be putting ourselves in a situation where we've invited people to basically prevent us to have any more power over pass-throughs, rather than affirming ourselves that we do, in fact, have the power to do something about them.
I mean,
so just be under no illusions that this isn't going to be a slam dunk.
Well, okay, I understand that, and let me speak to it. If there's opposition to our authority to pass things through, especially post 2012, then it means it kind of hurts everyone, right? It hurts schools, because then landlords are going to have to figure out how are we going to make up for these post 2012 measures. It kind of hurts landlords, because landlords are going to be like, oh, for every post 2012 measure, I'm going to have to pick it up. Like, I think
you and I know that.
All right.
And
Commissioners,
I
we
understand
might need to save this for the actual item that the ballot measures are being discussed on, because I think, as opposed to the direction you were trying to clarify, we're going a little too deeply into that subject matter.
So if I could at least just get some, it seems like there's support for coming back to this with a
I would
potential
support coming
three-way
back.
solution, including this ballot language measure. Look, I'm campaigning again in 2018. I will personally commit to supporting and explaining this ballot measure language. I think it's important. I think it's a good governance measure. I think, these are the types of measures that public servants are supposed to make. I understand we have a long list of items tonight, but this is really important to me. It's really important to many people in this room. So I would ask for my fellow commissioners' support.
I support.
That's
I also think that it's important that we clarify our authority, because let's say 20 years from now it's not clear and we have a different board and a different council. We just want to be clear.
Yeah.
Commissioner Flora Orgeron, do you have any final?
I've already given my support.
All right, that's at least 3. So do you have any further clarifying questions for us?
I do not know.
All right, thank you very much. That concludes item 11A. Thank everyone for their input, and stay tuned. We're moving on to item 12A, and we're going to have a staff report. Okay. Thank you.
The staff report comes complete with visual aids, so. Okay.
There's no way I'm gonna make it, but
The staff report has visual aids. Oh.
All right. Thank you, Lonnie, for setting that up. The board has before it tonight a recommendation that it consider recommending to the City Council 2 amendments to the city charter. The first would expressly and unambiguously establish in the charter the board's authority to authorize surcharges, which the board has had a discussion on already, and I won't belabor the point by going into it again, especially because I understand we'll be discussing that again at the next meeting. The second, which garnered a great deal of the public's attention this week, thanks to a story appearing in Tuesday's Daily Press, would come into play only if the California electorate adopts what will appear on the November statewide ballot as the Affordable Housing Act. Oh.
What'd you do, Lauren?
Which is the this one, the fourth? Okay. Nope, there you go. Nope. Nope.
Maybe you could just manually cue him.
Do you want to present? Stephen, do you want to present down there?
Yeah. Do you mind if I just ask you to go to to tell you when the next slides are up? All right. Okay. So, the Affordable Housing Act. So, what is the Affordable Housing Act? It's a voter-initiated ballot that would do 2 things. First, it would repeal the Costa-Hawkins, and if you could go to the next slide, this is the exact language. It would state the sections in Costa-Hawkins that would be repealed. Second, and you can go to the next one, it would restore to local government the ability to establish initial rents and rent increases. It would bar the legislature from enacting a new version of Costa-Hawkins by permanently restoring to local jurisdictions that ability. And here's the exact language of that. And you could go to the next slide. Oh.
Ooh, crystal ball.
Okay. All right. All right. So, is the Affordable Housing Act going to become law? Will Costa-Hawkins be repealed? Nobody knows, but we do have some indication of where voter sentiment lies. If you can go to the next slide. There was a survey that was done in September of last year, and that survey showed that 84% of respondents, this is again statewide, this is not in rent control jurisdictions exclusively, this is throughout the state, say that housing affordability is a serious issue. 56% considered leaving the state due to the high cost of housing, and 60% support allowing local governments to establish rent controls. So while there's no way of knowing whether a specific ballot measure will pass, it certainly is not something that is outside the realm of possibility. So if the Affordable Housing Act does pass in November, how would that affect us here in Santa Monica? The good news, both for landlords and for tenants, is that it would have no effect on existing tenancies. But, go to the next one. It could have a big effect on new tenancies. And to understand why, we have to take a short detour into some of our recent history. And if you can go to the next slide, that's the one you just had there. When rent control was first adopted, the city charter, specifically section 1804B, controlled rents at their 1978 levels. If you go to the next slide. When Costa-Hawkins was enacted, the voters amended the city charter. As amended, the charter continued to peg rents for then existing tenants to their 1978 levels, but it included an exception for new tenancies. For new tenancies, it provided that landlords could establish base rents for new tenancies at whatever level they could negotiate in the open market. So here's how the charter looked after it was amended. But note that landlords' ability to establish base rents at market levels was contingent on state law allowing it. And what I've done there is included all of 1804B's current text. In gray is the stuff that isn't specifically germane to our discussion. In black is the initial language that was always there, pegging base rents to their 1978 levels. And the second portion of black text is what was enacted to comply with Costa-Hawkins. And note specifically the underlined portion of that black text, which provides for the establishment of market level base rents to the extent that they qualify under state law. So if you can go to the next slide. So to recap, here's where we are in our discussion so far. Under the current charter, a new tenancy's base rent can be established at market levels to the extent permitted by state law. The state law that permits landlords to establish market level rents is Costa-Hawkins. So if Costa-Hawkins is repealed, the only remaining definition of base rents for new tenancies will be the rent that was in effect in 1978. If you can go to the next one. So here's the operative language that would apply if Costa-Hawkins were repealed. It's just that first section of the text that's there in black. The other section that's crossed out would still be actually physically in the charter unless it was amended, but it would have no effect because, again, it allows for market rate base rents only to the extent authorized by state law, but the authorizing state law would have gone away. So you go to the next slide. So in other words, if Costa-Hawkins is repealed, rents for new tenancies will be the rent in effect in 1978 plus general adjustments unless the charter is amended. In the past, and as recently as it's at the board's last meeting, the board has articulated some goals and priorities that should animate any such charter amendment. The first is the board's longstanding goal to restore full rent control as the voters originally intended, which would eliminate market rate increases for new tenancies. Commissioners have also said that they would want to ensure that any post-Costa-Hawkins charter amendment protected existing tenants, protected owners from large-scale rent rollbacks, and avoided unnatural rent inflation pending any charter amendment. And this is the same thinking behind the short look-back rent rollbacks that apply when new rent control laws are enacted. It's why in our law, which was adopted in 1979, it looked back to 1978 rents because owners knew that the rent control law was coming and didn't want to lock in permanently the panicked increase in rents that landlords might have imposed in order to have the advantage of that going forward. You go to the next slide. The board could meet these goals by doing three main things. First, provide for no changes for in-place tenants. So long-term tenants would be protected, and there would be no rollback to 1978 rents for newer tenants. Second, provide a one-time bump for units that have never experienced a Costa-Hawkins rent increase, but only after a long-term tenant moves out, and the bump would only be up to a specified limit. Third, the amendment could be drafted in such a way as to prevent the anticipation-induced rent inflation that I discussed a minute ago by limiting the base rent for new tenancies to the April 1, 2018 base rent or the median rent for a unit with that number of bedrooms in a given city area. You can go to the next slide. Here's generally what the amended charter provision would look like. You can just bring that all up. So the first section would be exactly the language that's in place right now. No landlord shall charge more than the base rent. And then there would be sections 1, 2, and 3, paragraphs 1, 2, and 3. Paragraph 1 would enshrine for long-term tenancies the existing regime. Paragraph 2 would provide that for tenancies created during the Costa-Hawkins period, they would remain as they are for the existence of those tenancies. Paragraph 3 would be the main substantive change. And that would say that for, and again, this is not necessarily the exact language, I'm just providing this as a framework of the kinds of things that the board might consider if it wishes to do something. It could peg the rent ceiling to that which was in effect on April 1st of this year, or the median rent established over the 3-year preceding period, as is in the city area for units of that number of bedrooms. If you can go to the next slide. So the overall effect of this, would be to take a snapshot of the current conditions, lock those conditions in place by allowing a one-time bump for units that have never had a Costa-Hawkins rent increase, ensuring that the bump is no greater than existing conditions warrant, and allowing the bump only after long-term tenancies have terminated. And that's the end of the slideshow. 2 final thoughts. Staff is mindful that the board stated only last month that it was not inclined to recommend an amendment to the city charter until and unless Costa-Hawkins is actually repealed. By bringing this matter forward, staff is not trying to push the board into a different posture, but I did not alert the board to the full possibility of what could occur if Costa-Hawkins is repealed and the charter remains as it is, and I wanted to make sure that I did so. Of course, if Costa-Hawkins is repealed in November, the charter can be amended at a future election, even if it is not amended in 2018. We would merely have to navigate the difficulties that might arise in the interim. This brings me to my final thought. There was some discussion of holding a special election. It is my understanding that under the election code, a city charter cannot be amended at a special election. It has to be done at a regularly scheduled statewide election. So I don't believe that the board could just rush in quickly and hold a special election for the purpose of amending the charter. I've forwarded that inquiry to, it's ultimately the city attorney that will put it, will do the analysis of that, and I forward that inquiry to them. So if the board wants to do anything, wants to discuss the matter further, then I will be able to give you their answer on that. But again, it is my reading of the elections code that a city charter cannot be amended at a special election. Thank you. It is election code. Sorry about that.
Nice.
Yeah, I think so.
Madam Chair, can you indulge me just a minute before we begin public comment?
Well, I don't know if
are you still looking at it?
Oh, I've got the answer for you. Election code section 1415. Oh, 15, 1415. Yeah.
Is that the conclusion of your report?
Yes.
Okay. You have a question?
Can you indulge me a minute before public comment? I want to throw out something a little bold here. As all my fellow commissioners know, we were bombarded this week with emails on this issue. I did not receive but 3 emails out of dozens upon dozens. Some people emailed me the same email twice, that were the same emails from last month in support of vacancy decontrol. Santa Monica Surrenders Rights is not clamoring for this to be on the ballot. And I have to say, I'm looking at things statewide. I really think on a generous day, this may be statewide, on a generous day, has a 15 to 20% chance of passing. My concern is that there's been a really tremendous amount of anxiety that's been stirred up this week that I think has been really unnecessary. We did not ask for this. This board did not ask for the statewide initiative. The person sponsoring the statewide initiative couldn't even get the state, and by a big margin, to agree that drug costs were too high. So I really don't think this thing is going to pass. And I'm going to propose something bold. And that is, quite frankly, I know Stephen and the staff have worked incredibly hard on this, but to avoid a lot of unpleasantness that's about to come our way from about 30 people, and because I really don't think we know what you're going to say, and much of it is warranted, I really think I would like to move right now before public comment and save everybody 90 minutes to 2 hours of a lot of hell, that we reject the proposal and that we do not put anything on the ballot at this time.
I will second that
support
motion,
that.
and I want to speak to the motion, and it's proper and rules of procedure, so I'm going to speak to it. I think it's been overwhelming with the turnout here tonight and the amount of email traffic we've received that Costa-Hawkins ballot measure is premature at best, and I don't support a Costa-Hawkins ballot measure. I said it at the last meeting. That's confirmed again. I believe that to the extent that there are any concerns about rollbacks, those can be remedied if and when this ballot measure is addressed on the ballot. And I think it is extremely premature for us to try to do this within 2 months in a way that doesn't fully engage the stakeholders, in a way that is overly rushed, and it seems like folks do not have a lot of appetite for supporting this on the ballot. So I support it, and I support the motion. I second the motion, and I think I'm happy to hear from my fellow commissioners, but
before we
I
do
look
that,
forward to a vote on it.
Before we do that, I need staff to clarify whether it's legal to skip public comment. I mean, even if this board wanted to, which I'm not saying we do, is it procedurally correct?
The board has the ability to control its agenda. If it doesn't want to even consider doing something and just wants to remove it from the agenda, it can do so.
So, I'd like to hear from other board members before I give my own thoughts. Commissioner Phyllis just spoke, so Commissioner Drone.
Yes, I spoke at the last meeting about this, and I thought that what I recall saying then, I still believe today, and it's that trying to dedicate the time and effort to really do a thorough and comprehensive job on analyzing this and finding the right conclusion is just there just isn't enough time to do it and get it on the ballot this November, to do it right and get it on the ballot this November. And I'm not at all questioning the job that was done by council on this. It's just that there's not enough time for me to deliberate and think about it unemotionally, so that I can do what I think is the right thing to do. Like I spoke last time, I think that I agree that this is too soon, and I would support taking it off the agenda for today and saving people time and effort this evening. I will say, though, that I was given a little pause about the fact that we cannot, at least the way it sounds today, we would not be able to do a special election on this matter, and it would have to be on a general statewide election. That did cause me pause, but even with that, I still feel that we would need more time to do this right. So I'm willing to take that risk. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Commissioner Terosas?
Yeah, I mean, again, on a good day, I think that this ballot initiative has a slim to none chance of passing. I don't think that it was fully vetted before these signature gathering petitions started. But even if we assume that it does pass, I don't feel that I have the requisite information about the economic impact of reinstituting vacancy control in this jurisdiction. I mean, I think that to quickly fly by the seat of our pants and put something on the ballot that would have widespread implications for this and surrounding jurisdictions, when I haven't been hearing that any other jurisdiction is doing this, is very concerning to me. That doesn't mean that I don't want to take full advantage of protecting our renters, because I think I and others here do, but I don't think, again, anyone is clamoring to put a ballot initiative on the ballot. I don't know that this even would be supported by City Council at this point, and I support the motion.
Okay, so I'm just caught a little off guard by the proposal, but so my main concerns are that there might be people here tonight that have a slightly different perspective to offer, or something that's in opposition to what four of you have just said, and that they're not going to get a chance to be heard. I'm just concerned by that and the time people have put in to come. That being said, it's true that I also am not generally in support of a ballot measure at this time. So it would seem to save about 2 hours of your all's public comment before you would get to hear us say that anyway. But I do, so I'm inclined to support this idea of setting this aside. However, I do want it to be said on the record that, of course, there's much discussion between all parties involved of what something like this would entail, and it has come up very quickly. Unlike you guys, though, I do think we're all very clever and very hardworking, and that our staff is fully capable, should we have wanted to put together the economic analysis and the tools necessary to make a decision, and that is what we've been elected to do. However, I can see the tide of how it's going up here, and I am inclined, if staff will please instruct us how to separate the item, because there are two components to this item. Could you please advise on next steps?
Well, in the previous discussion, in the item that was before you a moment ago, before we discussed 12A, there was a motion to include as a part of that discussion a ballot measure that would be the first part of this, and so that will all come back to you next month. Yes, next month. And so, as just as a procedural matter, what would be happening with this specific thing is that it would be indefinitely tabled, just as a parliamentary measure. That's how you'd be doing it. And so,
does it need to be a motion to table?
Yeah, which I understand there is.
Is there a second?
Yeah, Todd moved to table. I'll second it.
Maybe I should change my language. I would move to table the motion and the recommendation.
Second. And
Discussion.
Certainly.
I just wanted to talk to your point, Madam Chair, that for those who may have had a different perspective than what has been going around, your opportunity did not go away. It just got postponed. So when this does come back to us, your opportunity will be, there will be opportunity then to present. So you're not losing anything by our tabling it. You're just gaining more of your evening tonight.
Thank you for your clarification. And the last note before I call the vote is to apologize to everyone who came here tonight prepared to speak, and to let you know that you're right to come. You're correct to come and give your points of view. You can still reach us via email between now and the next meeting. You can ask for constituent meetings. You can petition us in all sorts of manners about how you feel. I do also agree that the preponderance of the emails we received seemed to be slightly misinformed, and I don't mean that in an insulting way at all. I mean that in a just some confusion in the community. So I think Council's presentation was exceedingly important for explaining this issue to landlords and tenants alike, because it was very confusing as to what we were doing and why and how. And I hope it's more clear for any of you for whom it's not yet. You can contact the Rent Control Office for further clarification of any of our staff reports. You can write to us, and we hope that you will. And we hope that you understand our reasoning in reaching the decision that we have. And I will call the vote.
Commissioner Phyllis.
Yes.
Commissioner Flora.
Yes.
Commissioner Terosis.
Yes.
Commissioner Duran.
Yes.
And Commissioner Foster.
Yes.
Motion carries.
That concludes item 12A. And thank you all for coming. Please, please try to be silent or a little quiet on your way out so we can continue with our business. All right. And I've lost my agenda in all this paper mess. Is it B? So item 12B.
It's on our website. If you just go into
Commissioner Phyllis, do you want to, before we get to the staff report, do you have any similar actions?
I will withdraw 12B.
All right, 12B has been withdrawn. Do we have a second for withdrawing the item? Well, it went from being hers to being a consensus item.
I'll move to withdraw.
Second?
Yeah.
All those in favor of withdrawing? If you all could please maintain quiet on your way out. We are continuing with business, and City TV folks are not going to be able to hear us over the microphone. Please respect the decorum of the room. Thank you.
So just as a parliamentary matter, as with the last one, this would be a motion to indefinitely table.
Motion to indefinitely. I move to indefinitely table.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
12B is indefinitely tabled. Can somebody give me an agenda? I've misplaced my agenda. Thank you. All right, item 12C, the annual report. I look forward to hearing the annual report.
Yes. Not that it's.
It's okay.
That is not true. These things are fascinating.
You got all dressed up, Dan. Looking good.
There's a lot of important data in this, so let's give the presenter our attention in the audience.
I'm missing a shark skin for this, just FYI.
Oh, boo-hoo.
First game. No one cares.
I'm rooting for the refs in that series.
Huh. Well, you lost last night, so.
I just want to inquire, just for a moment, and if you'll indulge me, for the people who stayed out there in the audience, is there a particular item you came to speak on or hear about? Because if you did, it might persuade me to try to persuade others to rearrange something if I could for you.
Move it up.
Is there an item you're speaking on, or are you just enjoying the show?
It's a good show.
Wonderful.
Oh, great.
I was just going to try to accommodate you if perhaps it was.
No, we want you
No,
to
it's
stay.
okay.
We like people.
We have a television audience. I just wanted to try to accommodate you in case you wanted to speak on something that was coming after a lengthy item. That's all.
However,
Thank you so much.
if you want to leave, don't feel obligated to stay. You can leave if you like.
You're more than welcome.
This is interesting stuff. All right, let's proceed.
All right. Well, good evening. I'm glad it's not good night, Chairperson Foster and Commissioners. So again, I'd like to present the annual report. It does have 4 parts: the status of controlled rental housing, the impact of market rate vacancy increases, and the impact of the Ellis Act, as well as some departmental overviews. And as always, it's chock full of statistics, and I just want to say that it's not always about the numbers. We try very hard to do the work that we do with the highest quality standards and ensure that our interactions with the public are always thorough, efficient, and delivered with respect. So you can interrupt me as we go along, but I will certainly invite you to ask questions at the end. So to begin, we'll start with the number of controlled rental units at the end of 2017. There were 27,375 units. We track those units by the bedroom count. And as you can see, most of the units in the city are 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. They comprise 83% of the units here. And it's good to keep in mind kind of what share these different unit sizes have in the city when we look at the numbers. By the way, there isn't much change from year to year in the number of controlled units. There are sometimes, exemptions that are granted, or removals, or Ellis activity, but we lost about 220 units last year, 219 units last year. The year before that, we had gained 52 units. So we also look at the controlled housing stock by the area of the city. So there are 7 different neighborhoods or census tract maps that we use, and the share of controlled units in each area varies pretty dramatically. If you look at like the downtown area, there's only 4% of the units, and then along the coast, we have 38% of the units in areas F, C, and A, and 40% in the northeast section, areas G and E. So there's lower density along the Pico corridor and in the Sunset Park neighborhood. At the end of last year,
Is there any way to enlarge any of these graphs? I guess that one's,
Is
okay,
there a way?
sorry, I'll just turn this way.
Sorry, yeah.
No, it's all right.
Okay, I tried to make them larger also for the City TV audience because I can know it's hard to see when you're looking on a screen. Hopefully they have a giant screen at home. So at the end of last year, this is how the controlled housing stock broke down. We have 5 different categories that we look at generally. At the top are the 0 MAR units. So those are units that have never had any rental history recorded with us. Many times they might be owner occupied or held for storage units or something like that. There was a reduction in those 0 MAR units last year that was pretty significant. We lost 156, or there were 156 fewer of those. So that suggests that it's worth it for owners to put those previously unrented units on the market. Looking at the other small areas, we have some restricted units. Those are restricted due to evictions for owner occupancy. So the next tenancy after the owner leaves, the owner's not free to set a market rate rent. It would roll back to what the prior tenant was paying, plus any general adjustments. It also includes units that were Ellis'd and came back into the rental housing business, and there is a restriction on those for 5 years. And then we also have Section 8 tenancies. We don't control the rents for those while the tenant does have the voucher, but they do comprise 2% of the housing stock, and if they are re-rented to a tenant who doesn't have the voucher, we'll again control the rent on that. And then the 2 big sections, of course, are those units that have converted to market rates. At the end of last year, 69.6% of units had been rented at market rates since 1999. And 27% of the units continued to be occupied by tenants who moved in before 1999, or before 1999, you're right. There were 361 fewer long-term units at the end of last year. They were about 13% of the units that were rented last year. So 13% of the formerly long-term units went to market rate last year. So there was some interest in knowing if the composition of market rate units differed in the different city areas, and given that 69.6% of all the units in the city have rented at market rates, we looked at the different neighborhoods, and you can see those marked in red were below the citywide average, and those that are in black are above. So area D, which is the Pico corridor, actually has the lowest number of units, or lowest percentage of units that have been rented at market rates. Area G has the highest. This chart shows the distribution of market rate rentals across different property sizes. So it shows from 4 units to 15 unit properties, and then the range of units that have been rented at market rates. The printed version that you have of the annual report actually only goes to 14, so we've corrected that. So if you do decide to forward this to the City Council, we'll have that last section 15 showing, but all of the analysis included 15 unit properties. So if we exclude the 3 unit or fewer properties, 90% of the controlled units fall within this graph. And although only 27% of the units are long-term, it doesn't mean that only 27% of owners have not seen market rate rentals. In fact, if you look at the upper 2 bands of the chart, you'll see that 87% of the properties on average have been rented at market rates. The white band at the bottom shows the properties that have no market rate rentals, and they are in the minority. Only 3% of properties have no market rate rentals, and 73 out of the 2,335 properties shown here don't have any market rate rentals, just 73 out of 2,335. You can also see in the upper left that of the 4 unit properties, 40% of them have all the units rented at market rates. And above this units or building size, so 15 or more, there are only 3 properties that had no, I'm sorry, 4 properties that had no market rate rentals. And this chart shows what the median rents were for units rented last year and for the past 19 years since vacancy decontrol has come into effect. The median is the number in the middle, so half of the units in these different unit sizes have rented for more than the amount shown and half have rented for less. This represents 66,870 re-rentals of units in Santa Monica since 1999. And you can see that every year we seem to be reaching record highs. The record high for a 1-bedroom now is 2,295. And each one of these unit sizes from 1-bedroom and larger have seen increases for the last 9 years, and the only decrease we've seen is in the studios or the 0-bedroom units. They actually went down 1.4%. That's the first decrease that we have seen since the recession. Again, the studios only represent about 11% of the controlled housing stock, so most of the units are in the middle there, the 1 and 2 bedrooms. The rate that they are increasing is slowing a little bit. If you look on the right, you can look at the 1-bedrooms, and last year the median went up 4.3%, but the year before that it had gone up 8.6%. So it looks like there may be some slowing in the increases in market rate rents. There were also 2% fewer units re-rented last year than the year before that, and 5% fewer than the year before that. So the turnover is slowing down maybe a little bit. It could be a factor of these very high prices. As we'll talk about in a minute, a household of 4 needs an income of $110,000 to afford a 2-bedroom unit in Santa Monica. The report also has graphs that show by city area and by bedroom count the medians set last year. And it also shows the 3-year medians that we use for the tenant non-occupancy petition. This chart compares the medians of long-term units versus market rate units. In many cases, you can see that the market rate unit is renting for multiple of what a long-term unit rents for, or the median for a long-term unit. And that's across all city areas and unit sizes. Just looking at the blue, you can see for a 2-bedroom in Area B that the long-term median is $913, whereas the market rate median is $2,272. The median for all controlled units across the city, no matter what the unit size or the city area, or whether they were rented before 1999 or after, is $1,795. Again, half would be higher, half would be lower. This chart shows the savings basically for market rate tenants because of rent control. So if a tenant moved in any one of the years shown at the bottom and paid the median rent for that year, the bar graph shows what the current savings would be compared to the median set last year for that size unit. So this is for 1-bedroom units. The report also has all the other unit sizes in it. So the median last year was $2,295. So a tenant, say, who moved in 2010 is paying $687 less per month than they would if they had moved in last year. This chart is again meant to show the affordability issue in Santa Monica. So we took all of the units that have been rented at market rate, and we looked at what those units would have, what their median MARs would be today had vacancy decontrol not occurred, and the income that would be required to afford such a unit. So as you can see, without vacancy decontrol, a 1-bedroom unit today would be going for $900 as a median and would require an income of household income of $45,000. But with vacancy decontrol, a median 1-bedroom unit would be $1,907, and it would require a $95,350 household income. In some cases, you can see that the income needed today is more than twice what it would be had vacancy decontrol not come into existence. Considering also that the area median income last year was $64,800, no household earning the median income could afford to move to Santa Monica. And if it's a family, for the mom and dad and 2 kids to have a bedroom each to themselves, the family would have to make twice the area median income. This chart kind of depicts the same information from the prior one graphically, and at the top bar you see we took all of the units and put them into buckets, whether they would be affordable to somebody making would be considered extremely low income compared to the area median, very low income, etc., going across from left to right. And in 1998, before vacancy decontrol, a household earning the moderate incomes or less could afford 96% of the units in the city. So that takes us all the way to the blue band. So just 4% of the units could only be afforded by people making more than that. Today, looking at the bottom chart, you can see that all of those lower income households have very few units that are affordable to them in Santa Monica today. even households earning 110% of area median income could afford only 8.3% of the units last year, and that's 320 fewer market rate units compared to the year before that. So those are the people in the blue band. They lost share as well. This shows controlled units by the year that they were occupied, and you can see that 27% of the tenancies started in the past 3 years, so in the upper left quadrant since 2015. So about 27% of the controlled units are occupied by people who moved in very, very recently, and half of all tenancies have started since 2011. The report also includes charts that show only the market rate units and the distribution of those. It's also important to consider that rents have been rising since 2009 and setting new records every year. So all of those tenants who moved in, since 2011 have been moving in at what have been record rates. And I would say that there's another chart in the annual report that shows units that were vacated by the year that the tenancy started. And half the units vacated in 2017 were by tenants who moved in during the past 4 years. So that indicates very high turnover of the market rate units. The second major section of the annual report is the impact of the Ellis Act. The Ellis Act is a state law that allows owners to go out of the rental housing business. So they terminate the tenancies of all the tenants on the property and then must find some alternative use for the property. Sometimes they do come back into the rental housing business, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the chart shows in blue the number of units that were withdrawn in that year, and then orange are the number of units that were re-rented in that year. I think it's interesting that since 1999 and vacancy decontrol, the number of Ellis withdrawals has continued. So it may suggest that Costa-Hawkins isn't really a factor in Ellis withdrawals, but certainly there were some very high withdrawals in the early part. Yes, Commissioner Trost.
Go ahead. Yes, sure.
In the presentation. Okay, so obviously this part of the report was pretty troubling. It looks like we have some Ellis activity on the rise yet again, although it's a small trend with our number here. Is this information that was shared with the city's housing department in preparation of their Ellis study, which I hope is going to be returning to us shortly?
We haven't shared this year's report yet. We wanted to present it to you first, and then we'll talk about forwarding it to the city council, and I'm sure that it will be forwarded on, unless Tracy has already shared it with them.
Right, because I just think that, okay, so for 4 properties in the first half and then 11 properties in the second half, I mean, what's the trend information there? And then, of course, looking at which ones were occupied, which ones were vacant, what kind of pressures are going on. I mean, this is all the information that I would have liked to see in the Ellis report that we didn't see. So I hope that someone will take note and incorporate it.
Well, that would be information we should incorporate in terms of which units were occupied and which were vacant, and we have that information.
Right.
And yes, we have provided the consultant that's working for the city with the data for every year of the Ellis withdrawals, including all the way through 2017. So we provided that as she's working on the revision to the initial report that you saw.
Great. I can't wait for Kaiser Marston to return with a much more robust report. Thanks.
Yeah.
Commissioner Flora?
Well, just something to point out, if we look at our history books, it really shows that Ellis activity continues, even, in fact, it increases even in good times when higher rents are being collected. Look at the chart. What happened after that huge bump in 1990? The recession of 91, 92, things go down. Look at 2000, tech bubble bursts. Ellis activity goes down again until about 2005, 6, and 7. What happens in 2008? Great recession. It's only now going up again with the growing economy, the growing Obama economy. I'm not supposed to say that. But in 2015, 16, and 17. So, in better economic times, we're getting more Ellis activity, just as we're getting more sales of buildings. So, it seems like there's no one's safe from the good times, unfortunately, where you would think landlords are making a lot more money on what at least the market rates would generate. So it's a pickle. I mean, anyway, I don't want to slow us down
Let's continue
anymore.
with the presentation.
Sure. I think, it would be, I know that the board is interested to know what are the motivations of owners who are Ellising properties. So as that Kaiser Marsden study is continuing, hopefully we'll get some more information.
Oh, she's tried to talk with owners and find out what their motivation is. You can imagine that they are not willing to provide that information. So, well, you might hear from Mr. Dawson later, but that's something that she's tried to do and has not had success with that. So you're not going to hear a lot about that.
Maybe we can facilitate.
Let's continue with the presentation.
Okay.
It is, as Commissioner Flora pointed out, a conundrum, why is this happening? But so over time, we have lost 22,006 units to Ellis withdrawals, but that's not the end of the story. Some 22, I'm sorry, did I say 20,000? 2,206 units, as you can see in the far right column. And this year we thought we should also include in the report those properties that were redeveloped and then re-rented again within 5 years of the Ellis withdrawal date, and those units become subject to rent control. So that activity restored 258 units to the controlled housing stock, and so we have a net loss of 1,948 on 442 properties. So once a property is withdrawn, we track it and try to follow how that property is used after it's been withdrawn. So this pie chart shows the 442 still withdrawn properties and kind of the rough percentages of how they're being used. Residential use is still the most common. You can see that 27% of the redeveloped properties were made into condominiums, and single-family dwellings represent another 22% of the reuse. But there are a good number of units that were not returned to rental housing or housing. There's a non-residential use of 23%, non-rental or family occupancy of 19%, and
Would you postulate that 19% family occupancy / no activity could potentially be holding 5 years and just waiting? Could that represent that
It could
slice?
be, yes, because that would be a lawful use. They could redevelop the property and only have family members living there until the 5 years have passed, because it really doesn't. When is the property offered for rent?
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Conlon, yeah.
These family occupancy or no activity, they're not redeveloped properties. They're the property sitting there, the existing property. And some of them have been in this state for years and years. Some of the earliest withdrawn properties show no activity. They're just sitting there. So it's not all properties waiting 5 years. And I think there's a fair number of properties that are being used for family use or non-rental residential use.
And then the final section of the report just overviews the activities of the departments within rent control. Public demand for our services is very high. You can see last year we had 12,960 recorded contacts with the public, either at our public counter, by telephone, or by email. The Public Information Department also handles all of the tenancy registrations, and we literally get thousands of those every year as units are re-rented and owners register the new tenancies. We handle all the ownership registrations. We make sure that properties that are being redeveloped are not subject to rent control, and so we check to make sure before any demolition permit is signed off on that it's not a rent control property. And yes.
I have a question. Well, how are we? This is just people that come in person to visit us?
No, this is a combination of public counter, telephone, and email.
Can we count like website visits?
Yes, we do. And there were about 83,000 website hits last year. And that was a big increase. That was up 66%.
Great. Let's continue to increase our web presence.
Can you
how
enumerate for the public what you might attribute the decline in actual contacts? It doesn't necessarily reflect a decline in service, but could it be because things are available on the internet?
Yeah, I think that it could be a factor, because last year we introduced online registration of tenancies, and so that allowed.
Because this includes landlord contact as well.
It does, yes.
Right.
Yeah. And our contact with landlords and tenants is fairly even though there are obviously many more tenants than there are landlords.
Wait, can you repeat that really loud?
Our services to both landlords
Mr.
and
Millman, are you
tenants
listening?
Even. And,
Don't do that. You may answer the question for the commissioner.
Yes, but we're actually really happy to speak with either side, because our job is to let them know what the law says, and the more people know, the better everybody is. So
Agreed.
It's a good thing.
Okay. Can we do video conferencing?
I don't think we have the technology to do video conferencing. Like in what context?
Like if someone's disabled and they don't want to come into the office. Yeah, but what if they want to see them in person?
Like for hearings?
No, just in general. I think we should explore that.
We can explore it. We certainly have worked with people who are hearing impaired through the TTUI, and there's some services that we've used. So we also monitor the evictions. Last year we received 102 eviction notices. Owners are required to file copies of the eviction notices with us if it's anything but non-payment of rent. And we want to make sure that the tenants know their rights when they are served an eviction notice. We also do the exemption monitoring on owner-occupied exemptions, and sent out 500 letters last year to have owners recertify that they still qualify. And then the Public Information Department is in charge of all the newsletters, the website, social media, and this report. And then we have the activities of the Hearings Department. All these, this just one slide on each department, so it really doesn't well represent all of the work that's being done. But we did see a slight decrease in the number of decreased petitions filed last year, but it was still high. I mean, considering there are 52 weeks in a year, that's at least one petition being filed every week. Most of the time, almost most of the time, we're able to resolve the issues in mediation. It's effective both for the decreased petitions and for the excess rent complaints. More effective for the excess rent. 70% of them were resolved in mediation. And it's also important to point out that our services are used as much by the market rate tenants as by long-term tenants. So 65% of the decreased petitions last year were filed by tenants paying market rate rents. There were also many other types of petitions that were handled by the Hearings Department, including tenant non-occupancy petitions, as you heard tonight. And there are base rent or amenity determinations. And the report itself has the disposition of many of the cases. There's a lot of statistics there about how many were resolved in mediation, how many went on to a hearing, how many were, just a lot of activity. And a lot of noticing of activity. And finally, the legal department, which you're very familiar with. It defends the board in litigation and drafts regulations and resolutions, and staff reports on exemptions. But probably the thing that interests the public a lot about the what the legal department is doing is collecting information about the buyout offers. So if a buyout offer is made between a landlord and tenant, there is a filing requirement 31 days after the agreement has been reached, and we keep the information confidential, but we report in aggregate what the average buyout amounts are. In some cases, there weren't many buyout agreements filed by bedroom type, so you see 0 bedrooms, there was only one filed. It's peculiar, but the buyout amount was $1,433, much less than the standard relocation amount. Tenants would be paid if an owner had the right to evict the tenant. But on average, across the city, the buyout amount was $35,813. And there's a little bit of difference by city area. It really kind of depends on how many buyout offers were filed by city area. And that is the quick summary of the annual report. We do invite anybody who would like to take a full look at it to come to our website. It is there on the website, and we'll feature it prominently. You can also come into the rent control office and get a printed copy if you like. And if you have any questions, you can always contact somebody from the public information staff, an information coordinator or information analyst. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Well, we just want to thank you first so much for, as always, I tell members of the public, this is entertaining. I mean, to read this data in such, short attention span theater catering to form is really, really informative in a quick and concise way that I think any tenant, any landlord in town can really relate to the data. The charts are amazing, and I know that this is an accumulation of months of work on your part. So thank you once again for such a great presentation.
Thank you. And we will be sending out the tenant newsletter in May, and it's going to have some of the highlights from the annual report. So
great. Commissioner Duran has a question for you.
I also wanted to say thank you for your patience. You were here up to bat last meeting, and we tabled it. So thank you for being here late 2 nights.
No problem.
In a row.
And Commissioner Flora?
Yeah, I was actually just going to say the same thing. And just,
microphone.
And just read these 2 sentences for the report, which I think really says it all. As the affordability analysis later in this report shows, median rents established in 2017 were affordable only to households earning well above the median family income for a family of 4 in the greater LA metropolitan area, with the median price 2-bedroom unit now requiring household income of more than $110,000 to be considered affordable by traditional government standards. Wow. But thank you, Dan, for again, your patience and for putting together such a great report.
And I have to give credit to the whole agency because so many people in the agency contribute to this, whether it's, doing the data entry on all the tenancies or doing a hearing or, writing staff report or Tracy's great editing, or just about everybody's involved with the creation of the report.
Wonderful. I believe Executive Director Tracy Condon wants to say something.
Well, I wanted to acknowledge that as well. I think this shows the tremendous amount of work that 24 people do within the agency, and Dan highlighted it, but I don't think there was even a mention of construction decreases. But I think Amy would tell you that although we didn't have a large number of construction decrease petitions filed, we were dealing with a lot of tenants either in mediation or on the phone or eventually in a hearing. So this captures pieces of what we're doing, but doesn't really express the full extent. And I want to acknowledge the staff for the tremendous amount that they accomplish in a year. Dan's staff does a great job putting this together with input from all of the everybody in the agency. So I want to thank Dan for the presentation, and I assume you'd like us to pass this along to the City Council. We usually do this as a report to the City Council
Mhm.
about the controlled housing
I
stock.
would be proud to forward this on to the city council.
Can you tell
Commissioner
us
Terosis?
when that would you present it at a meeting?
No, we just
Oh,
forward
okay.
it to them through a memo.
Okay, great. I just also wanted to say thank you. I obviously know it's not just one person, but you did a great job, and I think everyone on staff, I'm constantly impressed. I hope that our new database system will make this even easier to do, polling reports, because I honestly can't even imagine it is to compile all of this. And also, I guess my only comment is I felt like the mediation resolution rate of 49% seemed pretty low. Is there any reason why we think it's so low for the? Yeah.
Amy?
Oh, am I on? Okay.
Your
Yeah,
screen went
I
off.
know. I just feel like it should be
There we go.
just in my own
Thanks.
personal experience higher.
Sure. You know, excess rent cases are pretty much about money. So those tend to resolve at a much higher rate. The decreased cases are not only about the conditions, but frankly about the long-term relationship
Yeah.
between the landlord and the tenant. And our mediator, I think, is outstanding, and sometimes she mediates cases for months
Yeah,
trying
right.
to get a resolution. But
Okay.
some of them just
Yeah.
can't.
Sometimes
Can't be
reached.
if people are unreasonable.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, great.
Well, if there's nothing else, then that'll conclude item 12C, the annual report. We thank you so much. And we now have item 12D, ratification of memoranda of understanding between the board and the various employment groups. Do
Can
we
I
need
make a
staff report?
motion?
Well,
A
you
quick-
can go ahead and make a motion if you want.
summary
You've
staff
been
report?
very involved through the negotiations. You've heard what we've been negotiating with the staff. I'll just say that the primary thing in these agreements, both with the collective bargaining units and the unrepresented employees, are cost of living adjustments over the next 3 years. For 2018, a 2.3% cost of living adjustment. For 2019 and 2020, cost of living adjustments equal to the annual change in the Los Angeles area CPI for the preceding year, but not to exceed 2.5% in 2019 and 2.75% in 2020. And other than that, there were some non-financial changes to the agreements, which were summarized in the memo, and that's all I have. So I ask you to ratify and authorize me to sign these agreements with the bargaining units and the unrepresented employees.
I move to ratify the MOU and authorize you to sign the bargaining agreements with all of the referenced employees.
Second.
Commissioner Duran?
I was going to second. so.
All right. That's a first and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The measure passes. Thank you. And on to our last item of the night, board discussion item, an item brought by Commissioner Carolyn Terosis. Carolyn, would you like to?
Yes, and I'll try to
Speak
make
to
it
that.
quick. I know everyone's fatigued. I am hoping that the board would consider supporting me in placing an item on next month's agenda to take a position on several state bills. I think that we know that this is the second year of a 2-year session. First year was very active on housing bills. This year, very, very active, especially on tenant protection bills, which I think are directly within our jurisdiction here. Just to name a few, I think that we obviously have AB 2219 from Assemblymember Ting, which is the acceptance of third-party rent payments, which I think we know, based off of first-hand experience in Santa Monica, would be important. And I would ask staff to come back with and consider recommending a position. We also have AB 2343 from Assemblymember Chu regarding a wide variety of eviction protections for tenants statewide. And then, of course, our favorite Assemblymember Bloom with AB 2364, which I think we've been pretty involved in, related to Ellis. There's also AB 2925 from Bonta, which defines good cause for eviction, which I thought was a little bit odd, not just cause. But potentially those are a few of the bills that we could return back. I think I would like us to be a little bit more active on state legislation. There's also this SB 827, which I'm sure people have a lot of thoughts on, and there have been various bodies that have taken positions that was just amended by Senator Wiener. I think we should think about if we should take a position on that. And then finally, I would like us to consider adopting a state legislative agenda on an annual basis so that we don't have to wait for over a month before we can talk about bills, especially as the bills move through the legislative process very quickly. They get amended. There are committee hearings. I would like our Sacramento advocate who's there to be able to, nimbly move and take a position. And I'm happy to explain that further at our next meeting.
Well, that is a wonderful summary. We do have one public request to speak on your item before we have further discussion. Mr. Michael Millman, you've requested 1 minute.
Actually, I'd like a little more time since I didn't speak before. I've said this before, if the landlord and the tenants are paying equally for the reg fees, then let's get a working group, sit down, let's not violate the Brown Act, and figure out what bills the industry can support and what bills the tenants can support. It's not fair to send money to Sacramento, my money, or my colleagues' money for bills that we're opposed to. We agree with you. Your job is to protect tenants and protect and preserve housing. So we agree with you. We want to be your partner, but it's not fair to send up a whole agenda and many of those bills we can't support. It's just not right. Now, that's all I'm saying. It's a question. It's a question of fairness, but being active in Sacramento is healthy and positive and good, and governmental agents.
I'd like to hear the end of your thought.
I think governmental agencies should get into the game and get involved and say, you have a lobbyist, he's an excellent guy, for $50,000 a year, let's get in the game. But let's get the landlords to sit down as long as they're paying. That's all.
I have a question for you, for the
Yeah.
speaker, before you. So, in addition to the $8 per unit that you talk about sharing with the tenants, what other organizations represent your businesses or your trade's interest in Sacramento?
Excellent question. We have always piggybacked and enjoyed a lot of encouragement from the realtors who somehow feel if they sell the units, they'll make a commission. Some very
Do AGLA or CAA employ lobbyists?
CAA has a really excellent Cadillac staff up there. CAA wouldn't give mom and pops the time of day. They don't need Michael Millman, and they don't need AGLA, and they don't need Action. They have enough money and enough influence with the big, huge units. They don't need me. So they don't they don't need us.
Save it for your discussion.
But we have volunteers in AGLA, in Action. We go to Sacramento. We, as you say, we've been on Southwest. We go up there and we kibitz with the legislators and talk to them about our issues, and we're pretty effective. Bill's gone many times.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure you were equally represented. Thank you, Commissioner. So thank you for your public comment. We're going to move on to discussion. All right, Commissioner.
I just want to clarify your point. I wasn't suggesting that the agenda referenced specific bills. I was suggesting that the agenda referenced like policy positions that this rent control board would be in support of or opposed to, which would then enable our staff to send letters of support or opposition on certain bills that fall within the policy parameters. And this is very consistent with what other legislative bodies do.
I'm just saying I support that if in the old days the tenants were paying 100% of the carriage, I would have no reason whatsoever to complain. But as long as I'm paying half, I shouldn't have Mr. Brian Augustus representing positions that my people are very much opposed to.
Okay, public comment is, let's end that. Thank you. Commissioner Flora.
I just wanted to say I'm very supportive of Commissioner Terosis's the spirit of what the Commissioner Torosis is saying. I've thought for years we should be more out there. We see Brian a few times a year if we're lucky, and there's sort of this general understanding of what we think are bills that meet the needs and wants of not only Santa Monica rent control, but other jurisdictions. But, you know, one of the speakers tonight said it. You guys are thought leaders. So let's be thought leaders. You know, if you've ever watched the California channel, maybe many of the folks watching us tune in. I've tuned in from time to time. You'll see that when a bill is discussed, they often list 3 supporting organizations and 3 opposed or what have you. Now, we may not always be the biggest support organization, but we should be letting legislators outside our area know that we've got their back. I want Phil Ting and Rob Bonta and all these guys, I want them to know we're here and we're speaking up. And they may appreciate it a bit more if we've got their backs on a particular item. Maybe we're opposing them on a particular item, but you know, the give and take. So we should be getting our name out there and leading thought. So I certainly support the spirit of what Commissioner Torosis is saying, and I'm prepared to discuss that next month.
I'm also in complete and total enthusiastic support of this item, and thank the Commissioner for bringing it forward in a formal manner. We are confident that our staff is constantly in contact with other rent control jurisdictions of all types, by charter, by ordinance. We're also confident that our staff is in constant contact with, much more than ourselves, with our lobbyists and with all manner of representation that we have in Sacramento and other parts of the nation and the county. But that being said, us being the public face of the board, absolutely, we should formalize our participation to a much greater extent, as we all see fit, as the consensus of this body. After Commissioner Duran.
I agree to all of the above. That's it.
Great. What action do you need us to take, if any, staff, on this matter, since we have consensus? All right.
So would we bring back a resolution on the bills that Carolyn mentioned?
To start with, you mean?
My understanding is that you're not seeking.
I would have recommended
so 2 things. Okay.
Mike, yeah. Sorry. TV can't hear.
I was just saying that I would like staff to recommend, I move that staff recommend a position on any of the bills that are under the purview of protecting renters, clarifying the landlord-tenant rights and responsibilities, promoting acceptance of third-party rent payments, et cetera, everything I listed in here, and come back with a framework for a state legislative agenda that we could ratify on a yearly basis.
Okay.
Well, it's possible that Mr. Augusta will be here for
Right.
the May 10th meeting. I'm not sure. If he is, it would be a great
Would
opportunity
love
for us
him,
to kind
yeah.
of work through it with him,
That'd be
a
great.
framework. I know the City Council adopts such a framework both for federal and state legislation. You can find it on the City Council website if you're interested. So he's either going to come May 10th or May 24th.
Right.
So certainly that will give us an opportunity to hear from him about this year's legislative session, give us an update on some of these bills, and talk with us about developing a legislative agenda.
Right, and just to be clear, I want to be able to take a position on the bills at the next meeting.
So she wants a recommendation.
Well,
a recommendation from staff for a position on the bills that fall under the purview of the items I mentioned.
okay. So, I can talk with you separately.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
All right, great. We have had a late chit request by Mr. Bill Dawson, who says he was unable to be here at the beginning of the meeting for public comment and has requested 2 minutes. What does the board think? I need a consensus.
I'm fine with that. He waited. I mean, he does have an LA Kings jacket on, which I'm really not supportive of.
Those are points.
Kings lost last night. Sharks won tonight. Just want to say that.
The wheels come off after 11 p.m.
Most of us defer to the Kings fan in all of us.
Agreed.
Not the Sharks people there.
Let's
go Blues.
Not the San Jose Sushi.
Mr. Dawson, please, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. Bill Dawson, Sullivan Deturi, also the Apartment Association, but I'm here expressing my personal opinions. First off, I wanted to thank Stephen Lewis and his staff and all the staff for their work on the Costa-Hawkins and trying to figure out all the what ifs. I think it's really important. I was going to stand up and speak tonight and recommend following Mr. Lewis's recommendation of your board going to city council and proposing some kind of ballot measure to fix the items of the Costa-Hawkins rents as well as the clarification on the surcharge pass-throughs. I see those as problematic going forward. I do recognize the shortness of time and how difficult it would be to really kind of grapple with this. I was really surprised that the audience didn't get crazy when you tabled that issue. But I was kind of glad. One thing I just wanted to express to you, there's a whole lot of fear. It's unfortunate that the article in the Santa Monica Daily Press had a really poor title. I thought it was a good article, but a really misleading poor title. I talked to Mr. Lewis today after I read the report, trying to help me. I feel like I'm pretty intelligent guy, trying to grapple and figure out that, hey, he identified a potential problem here and he was trying to fix a potential disaster with all these what ifs. I don't think it's gone away, but I guess my last point is all the owners that were here, a lot of them have never been here ever. Some of them were my clients. I was on the phone all day long. People are really scared. They really are.
Go ahead and continue with your thought.
And so I think maybe a suggestion for you is maybe think about staff, some kind of press release or clarification or something that, hey, we recognize that there's a potential problem, we're trying to fix it. We're not trying to go back to the draconian 1978 rents. We're trying to stop a huge potential economic and legal quagmire that would just blow up here. So that's my suggestion. So
Thank you for your comments. I believe we have a question for you.
Yeah, I mean, do you think it would be helpful if we wrote, I mean, do people read the Santa Monica Daily Press? Do your clients read the Santa Monica Daily
Absolutely.
Press? Okay, I mean, because
Yeah.
I was thinking when I
thought Santa Monica Daily rag, but I read it.
No, but I mean, when I read this article, I was just like, why do they continue to get things not 100% correct? I don't know, would it be reasonable if we wrote some sort of letter to the editor on behalf of the Rent Control Board to clarify implications, or do we not? Well, yeah, I know, but I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there. I mean, I agree. I agree with your sentiment.
There's
Yeah,
a
no,
lot
I
of
think that people
misinformation.
need education and outreach about what's going on. And I'm also not convinced that there wouldn't be some sort of legal injunction, even if this ballot initiative were to pass. I mean, I think there are a lot of things that have to happen before any of these fear tactics step in.
I know, talking from people in my industry and my side, if nothing is done and the state ballot measure passes and Costa-Hawkins repealed, I know our guys on our side, we're going to run in and go, let's get an injunction so nothing changes until we can figure this out. Right. So we don't get into this huge mess. I'm sure that I would think that would happen. So.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
All
Okay.
right.
Thank
That
you all.
concludes the business of this board for tonight. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Second, anybody? All those in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Thank you.